So, okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the South Burlington City Council meeting for May 5th, 2025. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Lori, would you like to lead tonight?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Promising.
Oh, we're getting there. For those in the audience who can't really see, we are having some technical audio-visual difficulties, but they're being cleared up, we hope. Going to item number 2, instructions on exiting this building in case of emergency and review of technology options with Jesse Baker, City Manager.
Thank you. So for those in the room, thank you for joining us. If we have an emergency in the room, you can go out the rear of the auditorium on the left or right side and then turn left or right to get outside. For those participating remotely, thank you for joining us as well. If you'd like to speak during any item on the agenda, you can raise your hand or put in the chat that you'd like to speak, and I'll have the chair call on you, or you can turn your camera on and the chair will call on you. For those in the room, obviously you can come up to the mic. Other than that, we are not monitoring the chat for content.
Thank you, Jesse. Item 3, agenda review. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of the agenda tonight from council? No. Okay, good. Move on to item 4, which is comments and questions from the public not related to tonight's agenda. Are there any in person here in the room or online?
None online.
Nobody has their hand up anywhere? Nobody in the room wants to speak about something on the agenda? All right, then.
Oh, wait.
Wait.
Jerry Silverstein is saying he would like to speak.
Okay. Jerry, you want to turn on your camera?
We'll try. Open system settings.
I mean, not that it matters. Only one of us can see you.
Hear you.
Yeah, we can, but we can hear you.
No, the camera's not on. Can you hear me at least?
Yep.
Okay, why don't I just go with voice and I'll try to figure out the camera as we go along. First, I have before I start,
Can you identify yourself, Jerry, clearly for us?
Jerry Silverstein. I live in South Burlington. South Burlington School Board only allows 2 minutes for comments. Do I have the same restriction here?
Well, when you get to 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you to hurry up.
Okay, fine. So the first point I want to make is I have a request, and since the South Burlington City Council is interested in global warming and the city's carbon footprint, my request is that a forensic analysis be done of the carbon footprint of City Center. And that would require everything that has gone into building City Center, buildings, steel, concrete, asphalt, all the materials that go into, furnishing it, as well as the people involved. It's a big project, but it would give you an idea, if you're committed to lowering your carbon footprint, how much your activities actually impact greenhouse gas reduction. The second point I wanted to make was with regard to electrification, which the City Council is interested in doing as a way to reduce greenhouse gas reduction. And I want to emphasize the fact that the Vermont electric grid is part of ISO New England, the New England grid. And so when I turn on a light in my house, the electrons that energize the bulb in my house basically reflect the energy source composition of ISO New England. And right now, as I speak, it's 56% natural gas and 16% nuclear with 8% renewables. I think that's important to keep in mind because whenever people talk about electrification, they assume that if they use a heat pump or they drive an electric car, that they're not producing greenhouse gases. Well, the truth is, to electrify your heat pump or your electric vehicle, you're going to be using electricity from the grid, which is usually about 50% natural gas. The final point I wanted to make, I would recommend not referring to carbon dioxide as a pollutant. And the reason I say that is simply because if we stripped the atmosphere of carbon dioxide, life on Earth would be quite different. As a matter of fact, none of us would be here because the planet would be frozen year-round, and I very much doubt any of us could exist. In addition, the human body measures oxygen in the blood by measuring carbon dioxide. So calling carbon dioxide a pollutant is a bit of a misnomer, and I would strongly encourage you not to do that. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Jerry. Are there any other comments from the public or online? None? Okay, then we're going to move on to item 5, which is Councilors' Announcements and Reports on Committee Assignments and the City Manager's Report. Who would like to start? Any preference here? Lori, you want to start? Okay.
Fairly short report tonight, but on a week ago Friday, on my way to Illuminate Vermont, I had a brief meeting with some of the neighbors on Andrews Avenue about pickleball, following up on some of the changes that we've implemented around hours of operation, etc. And the report from the folks I met with on Andrews Avenue is that the change of time has been incredibly helpful for them, particularly on Saturday mornings, but that it has, and the earlier ending time both have made it so that there is more quality, quiet time in the neighborhood, which they really appreciate. Their biggest concern still is one of traffic and speeding. And I spoke with the woman who lives at the last house on Andrews Avenue, and at least twice a month, she has a very hard time just getting into her driveway. Often folks that come to play pickleball come in a group, and they park both sides of the street up and down, and it gets congested to the point where she's has a very hard time getting in and out of her driveway. I don't know. I said I would mention it at council, and I don't know what we have in the way of tools, if any, to be able to limit either parking to one side of the street there or hours of parking, or if there's any way to address it. But that is still an issue in the neighborhood that folks are talking about. So I wanted to share that with everybody. I spent that Friday evening at Illuminate, which was a remarkable event. I think our Park and Recs folk should get a huge shout out for all that they're doing, and especially for that event. And as I was there, I was watching what was going on the street, and I was imagining City Hall Park across the street, and that event being able to open up into that area with cafe tables and people sitting, and we're creating something pretty special here, and I just hope that we can keep that vision moving forward. And then last Wednesday on the 30th, I attended the annual fire department recognition event, which I was really honored to be at, and I am so incredibly grateful and impressed with our public safety teams, with the commitment and the care and the professionalism that they bring to our city. And in light of the structure fires that happened this last weekend, I feel just incredibly blessed to have the skill and expertise and talents of an amazing team. And I wanted to do a shout out to all of them and say thank you. And that's what I have.
Thank you. I second and applaud the tremendous work of our public safety officials and also the excellent relationships they develop with partners. That was something also that I took away from this, that it's so important that we have this effective cooperation with neighbors. None of us can handle it as talented, as good as, and as well resourced as they may be. It definitely takes this connection and with fellow municipalities and other units that help in these situations. I was gone for most of the time between the last city council meeting and this one, taking advantage of the spring break and a little extra time. To be honest, we took a kid a little more out of school, and we went to Texas, which we have good friends there we haven't seen for a long time. But what I was particularly pleased is that I visited Austin, which is, by the way, by chance, where our economic development consultants come from. And I'll just say I was blown away by Austin. A really incredibly vibrant community. And what it drove home to me was that, vibrance, good pedestrian, walkable city. The same was true when we went to San Antonio. Parks, green space. So I just really inspired me, especially after the first report we got from them, and they gave us all the status, some data that we all ourselves found, we ourselves to know that. It gives me great confidence that that path that they're and the information they're going to show us is going to help us continue to, as Lori mentioned, create a vibrant downtown area, but to reflect all the sort of values that we want in terms of human contact, but as well as green space and sustainability. I also, just before going on leave with my family, I had a meeting with the councilors I guess it could be coffee with councilors, but now a meeting, a discussion with councilors. And what it really drove home to me is how important communication is. I mean, there were just sort of 4 or 5 key issues that came up in our discussion. And what was interesting is in the group that was with us, there were 2 views on each one of these discussions. And one was the issue of paid parking on Market Avenue, which is obviously especially important to be sure that we have the ability of retail and restaurants, cafes to have movement. But there was also talk about, are we learning from other communities? And I'm sure we are. They mentioned that some of the more older people in our group there said, well, in Burlington, you can have your license. I didn't know this, your license plate put into a parking meter and you basically are exempted. So it was obviously suggesting there's going to have to be a transition to this notion of paid parking in South Burlington. There's also this talk about the importance of the question about the social service grant. Are we doing enough? Are we doing too little in terms of the amount we put for it? And then there was also just a broad discussion about the general visual of South Burlington, especially in the backdrop of what people had heard about the Economic Development Committee's strategy that is being developed by this company from Austin, and also the housing numbers that came out from CCRPC. And that's what this is about hearing the different voices. But what this all brought me back to was that this new initiative by the city to have a much more interactive web page is exactly what we need. Because we're able to basically go to the web page. There is the information on the CPC, on the housing issued by the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. There is the presentations by the Economic Development Committee. So I think I really want to just commend the city for getting that information out there so we can have an informed discussion. The last thing I want to mention is on Green Up Day, I'd met Scout Troop 611 when they were cleaning up the Eldridge Cemetery. And again, they were out there on Green Up Day, 40 of them working along National Guard Avenue. And, their estimation, or their Scoutmaster's estimation, is they collected in excess of 1,000 tons of trash looking for it. A big number, but I think what that shows it was just the excitement and exuberance that they were out there and they were contributing and making a difference. But it also brought me back to the recollection of when I first met them at the Eldridge Cemetery over by the airport, and they're helping us clean up and maintain with the sextons the cemetery. And that's because when I was in Texas, we were talking about the history, and then I reminded us the history we have here. And when I was doing research, when I cleaned it up, we have people buried there from the late 1700s. That there are 22 people buried there from the 1812 war. And the interesting fact is they actually never fought in the 1812 war. They all died of smallpox waiting to fight, which just remembers how lucky we are to have vaccines at this current age. But the bottom line here is I'm very happy that In our parks and open space master plan, the cemeteries are being included. They're a valuable part of our community, both historically and mostly as a space. So that's it. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Mike.
You guys who are logged in, sorry for those on Zoom. We're dealing with a technology issue in the room. We have three really important presentations tonight that I think it will ease everybody's coordination to be able to see, for those in the room to see it, and to just ease the presentation. So, Nick, what do you need us to do?
I'm gonna unplug everything in this room and turn it all back on. It's gonna take at least 10 minutes. You can pause the meeting, but I think it's gonna kill all the mics in the meantime.
Okay.
I haven't
Are
done
you-
this meeting
My
yet.
only thought is if they can be made presenters, everyone will be able to see the presentations on their own device, right?
Yeah, but not the audience members in the room. All right. So, are you okay with that?
10 minute recess.
So for those on Zoom, we have a technology issue in the room. We are going to recess this meeting for about 10 minutes and then hope we can all get back on after that. So around 7 o'clock.
So we're going to continue on with item 5, which is Councilors Announcements. We'll go to Andrew Chownick next.
Thank you, Tim. I'll be quick. I also attended the installation ceremony for our firefighters. It was incredibly moving. And I am so grateful for the men and women that serve our city. And I'm grateful to our chief, Steve Locke, for leading an incredible department and for leading an incredible ceremony and for showing how much he cares, really, so deeply about the men and women in his department. It was really something, and I'm grateful that all are safe with that horrific fire that we had this weekend on Lake Hill Road. Green Up Day was rainy, not as many folks walking around as I usually see Saturday morning. I know folks were out early in the week, and I think actually the city looks pretty good. The drainage ditches are the real hard ones, and they just accumulate trash, and I think most of those ditches look a lot better today than they did last week. So grateful to everyone that comes out on Green Up Day. Illuminate Vermont, at least the day I was there, the night I was there, was also wet, soggy, and cold. But it was a wonderful event, and notwithstanding the weather, I think there were about 500 folks came through the entrance that I was working at. So a big success and a really great event. And maybe next year we can maybe think about holding it a couple of weeks later. Might be just a slight bit warmer, maybe mid-May, because it was cold and wet. And I think if we, maybe we have a better chance with the weather a little bit later. I don't know. Just Lori Szymanski, I mean, we have talked a little bit about the fact that there are alternate places that people could park to get to those pickleball courts. And I know we've also talked about the possibility, which I would encourage, of us posting like a map with stars on those alternate locations and, asking folks to please try and park in those places. And I think if we did that people would, and it would take pressure off of Andrews Avenue. So we can talk more about that in our retreat.
Hey,
Elizabeth?
hey Travis, there really is quite an echo up here. Is there any? Do you know why that's happening? Can anyone who has a computer on in the room, double check that their device is muted?
Elizabeth?
All right, I hope I don't echo too much. The Charter Committee met, and there will be a presentation at the May 17th meeting. A couple of quick updates. The Burlington lawsuit was dismissed by the Vermont Superior Court, but that case has been appealed to the Vermont Supreme Court regarding all resident voting. And then there was some discussion at the meeting, and there may be an update. I did happen to listen into a NPR report from the Secretary of State that talked about the federal legislation that was introduced on the SAVE Act. And the Secretary of State does not know if the 3 municipalities in Vermont that have all resident voting would be affected by that at some point. It does not cover local, but it is federal, and it talks about elections. So more to come on that. The Housing Committee met and had a book group discussion co-sponsored with the library on The Housing Crisis by Jerusalem Demsas. It was a good group that got together and a lot of discussion. And then some interest in the group of just sort of how to move forward on affordable housing. And some discussion about apparently there's 11,000 homes around the state that are not inhabitable right now and need some rehab. And I know we're going to be talking more about Act 181 in terms of the opportunities for incremental housing tonight. I met with the legislative forum that was held on education, and that bill was passed from the House to the Senate. I believe it was supposed to go from the Senate Ed Committee to the Senate Finance Group on Friday. I haven't heard if it did that, but there was a lot of discussion on some differences between the House and the Senate bills, so there'll likely be some more discussion about that and kind of the notion of reducing the number of districts and supervisory unions into bigger regions with a target group of higher enrollment number, and reducing school boards. And some of the issue was around timing, when that would be implemented. And the general discussion was really around how does that better manage a reduced cost of the overall public education in Vermont, and then how does it improve outcomes? And those are sort of two elements that aren't flushed out in any of the bills right now, so more to come on that. And then I did have an opportunity to meet. There was a donuts and discussion with the superintendent that echoed some of those same themes the following day. And lastly, I just want to take a moment to recognize that a friend and colleague of mine from my school board days, Rich Cassidy, had passed away, and I had an opportunity to attend his memorial service on Friday. And he was a great mentor and role model for me as I volunteered to serve on the school board, and he continued to be very engaged in politics, in the legal world, as a community member in South Burlington, and just a wonderful person and fellow man in our community. So a great loss. And I want to recognize what many contributions he made over the years to South Burlington. That's it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I did see that obituary, and I was shy and sad by that as well. Thank you. I attended a Chittenden County Communications Union District meeting with the CCRPC, hosting it last week. Not a lot of action was taken. I also attended a pension the Pension Advisory Committee meeting, which there was an update given by SEI, and it was the update was for the first quarter of this year, ended March 31st, which things look good. Our assets were looking good before the first week in April. So we didn't talk about the first week in April. We just said we'll reach that stone when we report on the second quarter. But things are up and down. We'll just say they're unsettled right now. I did traffic control for a couple hours, 2 nights for Illuminate Vermont. It was a good time. That first night's band that played the whole night, Ultraviolet, they were really amazing, and I was so glad people were really enthused by it, and they were bouncing and dancing right in front of the stage. And I've heard that they're going to be at our summer picnic series at Veterans Memorial Park, so that's great, one of the nights. I attended a planning commission meeting. I also attended the fire department badge recognition event that was well organized and great to see everybody in uniform. And it was a good turnout with the crowd, and really fun to see the families supporting, their partners and husbands and wives and children that are in the fire department. So it was really great. I also attended, I think, Elizabeth, you mentioned the education reform meeting at the district offices last week. That was mostly attended by a few state senators and a lot of state reps. And they talked a lot, and they took very few questions from the audience. It wasn't very well attended. I walked away not very confident that a lot's going to change right now. And I'm sad to say that, because I don't know where Montpelier is headed with education reform. They're going in a lot of different directions. Hopefully they will merge at some point, and we'll see what happens. I want to tell everybody about the economic development meeting this coming Tuesday, not a week from tomorrow, which is at 5:30. They're going to have 3 speakers: Kevin Chu from Vermont Futures, Miro Weinberger, and Evan Langfeld. So that should be a really interesting meeting, and I'm planning on attending that. I also want to mention the fact that I went to CVS on Dorset Street a few weeks ago and was astounded by the amount of garbage and debris in their yard that need to be fixed up. They had a huge pothole, and they also had a stop sign that had been run over. So I asked Planning and Zoning who owns the property, and they said CVS. So I called the corporate number, and I finally got to somebody, and I said, these are all the things that are wrong with your property, and it stinks, and you need to fix them. And I went back 2 weeks later, and they fixed them all, except for the broken windows. There's still broken windows on the Williston Street. So just to point out that if you see something and you try to say something, sometimes things get fixed. But it takes somebody to try to get them fixed and to burrow down through the bureaucracy to find out who can actually do it, right? And finally, we had some pranksters in my neighborhood on Friday night that pulled up a bunch of street signs on Nolan Farm Road and Old Cross Road and Dorset Street and Royal Drive, and deposited them in various places. But everything's back to normal now. So, and there were a bunch of doorbells I think that were rung at 3 a.m. and some mail that was scattered around on Dorset Heights Road. But other than that, everything's fine. So, I think that teenagers will be teenagers sometimes. So maybe they were prepping for Green Up Day and thought that the street signs were refuse. I don't know. So that's all I have. Thank you. Jesse?
Great. I do just want to echo your thanks to our public safety team, both the firefighters, the police officers, and the dispatchers for doing a tremendous job on Friday night into Saturday. I want to give Chief Locke an opportunity to give a quick summary of that event for the community and answer any questions you might have.
Sure. So as you know, Friday night we had a significant fire over on Lime Kiln Road. That building is a 4-story senior living facility with 44 units with over 50 occupants. They will be displaced for an extended period of time. Can't say enough about the operations and how well not only our crews but of our mutual aid system. No one community can handle these types of events themselves, and we have a really seamless way of moving units that allows us the number of resources we need. But really a tremendous shout out to the South Burlington Police Department, who arrived there very quickly and their own peril, evacuated people from the 3rd and 4th floors without the safety equipment that we're lucky enough to have. And many of those folks were already out of the building by the time the first fire units arrived. So our police department then started shuttling people over to the reunification site at the college, at St. Michael's College. And so, again, a real huge shout out to the police department for doing work that they don't typically do. But I think our crews performed very well. This is a case where the code catching up with building construction. So if that building was built today, the balconies and the attic space would be required to be protected with fire sprinklers. That would have been a non-event. A single sprinkler head would have put that balcony fire out. You would have never heard about it. It wouldn't have made the news. Wouldn't have been sexy, and no one would have been displaced. But that building was built to code when it was constructed, and those parts of the building were not required to be protected by fire sprinklers. That's where we are.
Thanks, Chief. Just a reminder to the council that you have your retreat on Wednesday at 1 in room 301. So I'm going to hold the rest of my city updates to that meeting in the interest of time.
Thanks, Jesse. We'll move on to item 6, which is the consent agenda. And on the consent agenda tonight, we have the two AP warrants and the water warrant. We have item 6B, which is award the construction contract for the Mary Street Sidewalk project to Poulin Companies LLC. We have item 6C, which is approve an application for a small grants for smart growth grant to help fund the 2025 Energy Festival, which I'm looking forward to in September. Those are the only two items, I think, or three items. Three items. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 So that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And then we'll move on to item 7, which is the first reading of an update to the heating and service water heating ordinance and possibly set a public hearing for June 2nd, 2025 at 7 p.m. with Bettina Miguez, Climate Action Manager. Good evening.
Good evening. Bettina Miguez, Climate Action Manager.
I think you should now be able to share your screen.
Yes.
Does it look like that? So just a reminder, this is following an earlier presentation that Bettina gave you on this ordinance and requested that we move forward with some changes. So here she is.
Okay. So this ordinance is an ordinance that was first passed in 2022. And what we're going to talk about today is adding an extension, basically continuing an extension that expired in February 2025 with a few edits. So I'll talk very briefly about the background of exemption. The council had requested some research on what New York City was doing, and I'll go after that to our recommendations, and then a summary so that folks can quickly see what the exemption means and the next steps. So, can't see. The ordinance was approved, as I said, in 2022, and it took effect in 2023. It requires that all new buildings have renewable primary heating systems. That means that cover 85% of the load, and renewable service water heating systems. It does allow for a waiver under limited circumstances in which the applicant can show exceptional economic burden. And that original ordinance included an exemption to hot water heating systems in commercial, industrial buildings, mixed-use buildings, and multi-unit residential buildings that lasted from February 15th, 2023 to February 15, 2025. As requested by the council, we looked at New York City that has also been working on building electrification and phasing out fossil fuels in new construction. And the applicable law is New York City's Local Law 154, which effectively prohibits combustion of fossil fuels to provide heat or hot water in a new building. It does contain an exemption for certain uses. I'm not going to go into all the uses. And it is, the ordinance or the law takes effect over several years. And what I want to point out here is that service hot water, which is the red, has been excluded until from being fossil fuel free until July 2nd, 2027. So our recommendations are to extend the exemption for 2 years for multi-unit residential buildings, mixed-use buildings, and commercial buildings that are heavy water users, and we're defining those as requiring more than a 1-inch water meter connection. And we are also making a few edits to the definition section, and I think some very, very minor edits, just language edits. That's about it. And besides that, we think it might be a good idea to fund a study for of available hot water heating technology for larger applications that can inform the next steps in that matter. So in those 2 years, really have a study that we can then refer to see whether we need to continue with exemptions or whether we can do something else instead. Summary of compliant pathways. So if we think of renewable service water heating system as RSWHS, any building type, if you build it with a renewable service water heating system, you're complying with the ordinance. If you want to build without a renewable service water heating system, in a residential setting, you would not be, you can always, I'm sorry, let me back up. If you want to build without a residential renewable service water heating system, you can always go through the waiver. And so that means you make that calculation as explained in the ordinance of the operating costs and the capital costs of technology with fossil fuels compared to a technology, renewable technology, adding the carbon cost as explained in the ordinance. So it's kind of complicated, but there is a waiver that you can do. You can follow that path. And if it's deemed that the costs overall are higher for the fossil fuel when you account for carbon as well, then you could build without a renewable service water heating system. Or you could take this exemption in the case that you're a multi-unit residential building with a system serving multiple dwelling units, or if you're a mixed-use building, or if you're a commercial or industrial building. So residential buildings that do not have higher than 1 inch, larger than 1 inch water meter connection would not be exempted. Hopefully, it was meant to be easier to see than to read, to be honest. But so next steps, it would be a public hearing for June 2nd?
June 2nd at 7.
June 2nd at 7. And the second reading of the ordinance and then implementation. And I welcome any questions.
Any questions from council?
I just want to thank you for doing the research on New York City and clarification of their exemption that is continuing to 2027. And sounds like we might be ready to move forward.
So we chatted, and I appreciate that. So I'm comfortable with this, as Bettina said, if we study it so that next time this comes up, we kind of know, right, from the experts what's out there and what's not out there. Because I'm not an expert, but I think there is stuff out there that that would satisfy this need as we speak. But it'd be really good for the experts to tell us that. The one question I have about this is multi-unit residential. I think that's defined as 3 or more. So is that right?
3 or more units.
So basically single-family duplexes would have to have heat pumps or some other renewable source. But triplexes, quadplex, and...
So if you have 3 or more units and you have a system that is serving several units at the same time. So it's basically you still have to have a central system. If you do not have a central system, then you still would have to.
Oh, okay. So, well, that makes sense, right? So quadplex, individual heating units, they have to do heat pumps. But if they decide to do
heating is
individual hot water.
Oh, right.
They have to comply with the ordinance, but they do essential hot water. Okay, that's
right.
Okay, yep.
That is what that 1 inch connection basically helps categorize.
But there's a separate condition that has to be central.
So if each unit is going to have their own water, then they will each have a connection, and none of those connections would be larger than 1 inch. Therefore, they would not fall within the exemption, right? If you have the way we see it, if you have a small construction like you're talking about, quad, it is not in your best interest to have a centralized system because you're taking up quite a bit of a space that you could be using for each unit to have that mechanical room. And therefore, we think that market forces will themselves kind of tip it towards having a renewable hot water
Just give me 1
system,
second.
if that makes sense.
That does. Thank you for that clarification. And just for the public to be aware, so our climate action plan focuses on electrification because Green Mountain Power sources 100% of the electricity that we use in South Burlington from carbon-free sources. The reason that that's important is that if and as we add more units that consume energy, that means 100% of that new energy is going to be carbon-free. So we can satisfy our climate action plan by electrifying things that, previously used fossil fuels. We will be converting, appliances that used fossil fuels to appliances that are now 100% carbon-free. So that's why our plan relies on electrification.
Thanks. Bettina, in terms of just a little background for myself, was the original ordinance predicated on the New York City law?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And I know I put this question in, but I'm just curious as to why New York City was the benchmark, and were there other benchmarks?
It was not really a benchmark. It was a question from Councilor Chalnick last time.
I mean, I was actually just asking what other people doing, but one example was New York City. But,
One example, right.
Okay, so that's one example. And then the other question I had is the formula for the waiver still applicable? Does that have to be tested over the next 2-year period as well? Or is the way it's written, would it be applicable regardless of inflation or anything else?
Yeah, it's the cost of carbon is, what is it? It's not glued. There's a word for it. The cost of carbon is affixed or something to the cost of inflation. So it follows the urban index.
Will follow
yeah,
that. Okay,
it does.
those were my two
It does.
questions. Thank you.
I think I calculated it for what it would be for January 2025, and I think it was 112 instead of 100. That was the original number.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Mike?
Yes, Bettina, thank you very much for the presentation and for the city's recommendation. I fully support it. I think it's a very prudent way to proceed. We'll be hearing about the housing needs, about the affordability of workforce housing, and obviously the structures that you mentioned address that issue in a good way of creating density and greater sort of collective mobility that would hopefully also get people out of cars. While we, as you said, not jumping the gun, but doing the research to be sure that when we do introduce it, it is not disruptive to the building that's necessary. So I think it's a very balanced approach, and I appreciate your guys' broad and sort of thoughtful way of looking at it.
Thank you, Mike.
And if I may, just one comment, Councillor Fitzgerald, I did look at what Montreal is doing and what they're doing. They're going in a different tact in a way. And I don't think this is a requirement yet. It might be something that they're planning by 2030, that new construction will have to be, can be serviced with gas, but it would have to be renewable natural gas. And so that's their tact.
So thanks for the presentation, and I support this. I just want to read a quote from the ISO New England publication from mid-April. They said the preliminary data shows the power system demand in New England fell to its lowest on the afternoon of April 20th ever. This is the 4th year in a row that the grid has notched such a milestone with the lowest internal demand, and this is because of the effects of behind-the-meter photovoltaic and other renewables, right? Which is an amazing thing when we have nice, cool, sunny days and people aren't trying to heat or to cool their homes, right? And we need more of those, and so that's going to happen as we add more capability. Any other discussion? There's somebody that wants to make a comment in the public. Jerry Silverstein, are you there?
He's here, but he
Myself.
doesn't. Oh, there he
Okay,
goes.
can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, so I just wanted to say I disagree with Andrew with regard to GMP sourcing 100% of its electricity from carbon-free sources. The reality is the grid in Vermont would not function. It would collapse unless we were umbilically linked to the New England grid. And the New England grid, as I said earlier, I'm just launching one particular piece of information to make sure I have the statistic right. Darn, I thought I had it here. Let me go back one single thing. Yeah, so in 2024, let's see, gas-fired electricity represented 55% of the entire electrical output of ISO New England. And the large reports I've read, both from ISO New England and other operators of electric grids across the country, the general consensus is fossil fuels will be necessary for the near future because we don't have enough nuclear power plants to run all the electric grids, which would be one carbon-free source, if you will. And so the two things that you need to maintain electric grids are base load electric generating facilities. Those can operate 24/7, 365 days a year. And dispatchable sources. Dispatchable sources are entities which can quickly upregulate the amount of electricity they're producing. Wind doesn't do that. Solar doesn't do that. Hydro can do it, but depending upon excessively, hydro is a little bit problematic right now considering the relationship between Canada and the United States. So for the near future, fossil fuels will be a major component of the electricity generating system in New England, and Vermont cannot exist separate from the New England grid. And so suggesting or saying that GMP sources 100% of its electricity from carbon-free sources, it may be a true statement, but it doesn't in any way change the fact that when I turn on a light in my house, the electrons which are energizing the light represent the electrons which have come from ISO New England, in which right now 55% of the energy generation is from fossil fuels, specifically natural gas. It's a very nice idea to say we can always use carbon-free sources, but the reality is there isn't a grid in the United States of America which can operate without fossil fuels generating electricity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. So do we need a motion to set this public hearing date?
Yes.
Do we have a motion for that?
It may be in the attachment. That
I
everyone's
didn't see a written attachment. I
Right.
was looking
So,
for it.
Colin, can you guide us through the motions here?
I was ready to make it, but I couldn't find it.
If you're here, I'm going to make use of you.
The suggested motion would be we move to pass this ordinance at first reading and set a public hearing and second reading for June 2nd.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
That's
All those-
at 7 p.m. Sorry. just leaving for that.
At 7 p.m.
7 p.m.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you very much for coming down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right, moving on to item number 8, which is receive an update from, it's BTV right here on my laptop. Burlington International Airport on their operations expansion plans, climate action plan, and the noise mitigation program with Nick Longo, Director of Aviation. Good evening, Mr. Longo.
I'm very impressed that he was able to just steal sharing his screen from Bettina. While walking. Well done. Spoke too soon. I need some levity tonight. Oh, no.
Uh-oh,
That's okay.
that's all right.
Restart it.
Ooh. Let's try again. I'll just try again.
Everybody needs to hop
We
back
are
on.
having fun tonight.
Recording in progress.
These
People. So we all need to log in again and then we're gonna all
It's okay.
Boom.
Look, everyone's back. Like nothing happened.
They kicked you out. It did. So you got to re-log in. But everybody got kicked out. You don't end it for all. I figured it out when I was military. A 747 went over the islands 2 days in a row. 3 days in a row. The second one, they shut the house. Like planes never come in out of the coast. I go, it has to be military. Yeah. That was pretty close. I mean, 2,000 feet. This might be why you were here. There we go.
And then we'll have to turn those back on again later.
You'll just have to turn it up when you want to do it later. Yep.
Perfect, thank you. I sure do.
Okay.
I sure do, thanks.
Travis, can you keep that screen back around?
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Travis.
All right.
Four, 8. No, something happened. Hold on.
Technology is wonderful, isn't it?
I think the best part of the presentation so far is that sticker at the back of the computer. Yours are nice too. Yeah.
How's parking there right now?
84%.
84%.
We're good.
Okay.
Yep.
So go all the way to the top.
You got it. Go all the way to the top and fly out of Leahy BTV.
Does it look right?
Good. Yep.
Excellent.
Yep. Perfect. All right. But before I get going, I'll have the team introduce themselves.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Bartley. I'm the Director of Innovation and Marketing.
Larry Lackey, Director of Planning, Engineering, and Sustainability.
And online, we have Marie Friedman. She's our Director of Finance. My name is Nick Longo. I'm the Director of the airport. I think I've met with all of you, and thank you, of course, for all of your time. I'm a little casual today, too, because even though we didn't do it on Green Up Day, a lot of our staff don't work on Saturdays, so we did our Green Up Day this morning, and we
I think I walked about 6 miles from the terminal to the Winooski River and back again with our amazing team, and Jeff and Larry and many of our other partners and teams, including Heritage Aviation, were out picking up our yards as well, which was a lot of fun. So we're going to be very high level tonight. Our hope, and thank you, Jesse, for the invitation, and for the councilors for the invitation to talk high level about the airport, where we are, what's going on, what are we progressing and moving forward with, as well as an update on our noise compatibility program and our sustainability plans. This is one of my favorite quotes that we've been using lots, especially in the legislature. Roads are so important, of course, but you can build one road and 1 mile of that road and travel a mile, but you really can build a mile of runway and you can travel the world, as I like to say. And we really do see and participate in an extensive amount of projects at the airport. Just very basic, we are what's classified as a small hub airport. That's an FAA classification for Leahy BTV. Right now, we're projecting to see over 1.4 million passengers this year. That's both outbound and inbound into our area. We are the second busiest airport with commercial service in New England, second just to Boston. And think about that for a second. We are incredibly busy, very complex for the airfield that you see in this image right here. We do have 2 runways, but one is the primary runway, which is that north-south runway, which all commercial operations occur. And the complexity of the type of operations, from military, commercial, corporate, general aviation, electric aviation, vertical takeoff and landing, all sorts of different types of operations, which really elevates our air traffic control complexity as well. In fact, FAA just awarded an increase in salaries because of the complexity of Leahy BTV just a few years ago. We do have a Customs and Border Patrol, as many of you know, right at the airport, so we are a port of entry into the United States. We are also encouraging growth with innovation, both with, of course, Beta Technologies, which I don't spend a lot of time talking about in this presentation. I think many of you have heard and seen and hopefully visited their facilities, and they're an absolutely amazing partner. But also with other companies like Vermont Flight Academy, which is one of the only what's called a Part 141 flight school in New England, a very, very organized and FAA regulated flight school for professional pilots. And of course, we have our Vermont Army and Air National Guard supporting our operations at the airport, specifically with aircraft rescue and firefighting, as well as mutual aid throughout the surrounding area.
So we're really proud at this moment. We believe we have the most airlines at one particular time. We have 6 currently with Delta, United, and American Airlines, some of the bigger airlines out there. Sun Country runs seasonally to Minneapolis. They're kicking off, I believe, next week or the week after for their service. Frontier Airlines, we welcome back to the airport in December with a nonstop service to Tampa and to Orlando. And of course, Breeze Airways, which we established a wonderful relationship with just over a year ago, and we now have 5 nonstop destinations, 6 total through them. It's growing very, very quickly with direct flights, particularly to Florida, to Raleigh-Durham, which is hugely important for Beta Technology and OnLogic, who are growing in that area. And in 2 weeks, Nick and I will be in Charleston to kick off that inaugural flight. First time we've ever had that direct flight. We also have the most destinations at one point, at least dating back to 1990. We haven't found any other time where we had more. We have currently 19 destinations. 8, a couple of them are seasonal. One of them is temporarily on hold, and that's the Dallas flight, but we do anticipate that that will be coming back in the short term in Dallas. And we're also more than just commercial service at the airport. We have many airport attendants that provide thousands of jobs that Nick will get into in a second. That includes Aerodyne, of course, Beta Technologies, FedEx, Heritage Aviation, which is our FBO, the Weather Service, Pratt & Whitney Canada, which is a very large facility, of course, UVM Medical Center, the Air Guard, National Guard, and the Vermont Flight Academy.
The information on the slide here is actually a little bit dated, and we're undergoing an economic impact study ourselves, and we're really proud and happy to participate in the conversations that you all are having, especially on the aviation sector. So thank you very much for the invitation on that. When we studied our last economic report, which was part of our 2019-2020 master plan being required by the Federal Aviation Administration to undergo every 10 to 15 years. We recently did that, like I said, back in 2019, and we used 2017 and 18 data to study the economic impact of our region. Keep in mind that doesn't include Beta Technologies. It doesn't include some of the expansions and growth that we've seen over the last few years, including the growth out of the pandemic numbers and really getting back to pre-pandemic services as well as passenger numbers in the airport. We're valued, or at that time valued, at over $1 billion, and that includes over 5,000 jobs and a pretty large annual salary number in there, close to $200 million. Again, these numbers do not include Beta Technologies right now. We contribute so much to not just the state of Vermont through taxes, but also local option tax, and are supported with some state funding. That funding goes directly towards our capital programming. Over the next few years, this one happens to be a graph for fiscal year 2024 into 2028, we're looking at about $140 million in capital program over a 4-year period of time, some of which we are either under construction right now or about to lead into a construction project over the next 2 years. These funds mostly come from the Federal Aviation Administration, and you can see on the right-hand graph that pie chart there, the blue and the green parts of that pie chart are essentially our primary funding sources for these capital programs. The green being our entitlement funds, meaning a methodology, a calculation based on the amount of outbound passengers that leave Leahy BTV. The FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, grants or entitles those funds to every single airport in the United States. For us, that's about $3.8-ish million, again, dependent on the changes. The rest of these, especially the blue and the orange, which make up the significant portion of this chart, are competitive. We're competing across the country to make sure that the priority, the safety, especially from that runway outward, is primary to the missions of the national airspace system. These are competitive, and we work hard to make sure that we get those funds. In this case, that orange pie chart goes towards mostly our terminal projects that we have going on, which is incredibly important. This is just a slight breakdown of those funds, same type of information in chart format. We're looking again at about $140 million, and of that funding, we fund the local share of these grants internally. We also receive about 1.8% over that 4 or 5 year period of time from the state of Vermont. The rest comes from passenger facility charges associated with an airline ticket price. So a portion of that is coming from that.
Do you mind taking questions as you go along?
I would love to,
till the end? I'm just curious about your confidence in the security of federal funding going forward, given what's happening and how you're dealing with that internally.
Yeah, good question. I would love to say high confidence. I think it would be just slightly less than high, whatever that would be. Right now, again, those entitlements of federal funding are there. They're appropriated. They're there. The grants that we have, which are over 2 handfuls, maybe 3 handfuls, maybe 4 if you ask Larry, are grants that are signed and sealed. We applied for 3 additional grants this year, and we want to make sure that continues, but we don't know what will happen with those particular grants. All indications, though, for airport improvement programs, and that's the terminology for the grants, AIP, are that they're moving forward strong. The new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, Jeff and I were recently at a conference and we're able to speak and hear from him. I'm slightly less than high confidence in continued federal funding, specifically for airports.
What are the PFCs?
So passenger facility charge is associated with that airline ticket. So when you purchase a ticket specifically out of Leahy BTV every single time, $4.50 will be attached to that ticket, your outbound ticket. Of that $4.50, an airline will keep 11 cents of that, and we'll retain $4.39 of that. That's a federally regulated program, so not only do we have to ask and receive permission from the FAA to collect those funds, but we also have to request not just through a consultation meeting with the airlines, but also approval from the FAA to spend those funds. That's over $4 million a year that we receive, and we can use those funds only for eligible items like a 10% share. So even though we have a local share match to many of our grants, which are 90% federally funded, we can use those PFCs to fund the rest of them. Now that $4.50 hasn't changed since the 1980s, so it is a struggle, not just for us, but for many airports in the country.
So one thing particularly that is on my plate is I need to keep an eye on what's going on with our passengers and where they're choosing to fly out of, why they're choosing not to fly out of Leahy BTV. And we're right now currently seeing some pretty good success in terms of retaining passengers who are in our market share area. We do still see about 35.1% are traveling to Boston. A lot of those are direct flights and pretty significant amount of international travel that we're seeing. We don't really leak a lot over to Plattsburgh, not much at all, especially with the new news. Breeze is pausing service across the lake. And then, of course, all the smaller airports like Manchester or Bradley, they're going to see a smaller leakage in our travel market. And of course, we track AOT data to get a good sense of who is flying out, how many on a daily basis, and where are they going. And pre-Breeze and Frontier, we had a huge market for Orlando, Southern Florida, Tampa Bay and St. Petersburg, and Fort Myers as well. Breeze saw that opportunity, and so we haven't quite seen the new numbers yet, but we're very confident that we're going to see more blue than we are seeing red there. Still a lot of opportunity. We know we need to increase service to the New York market, and a lot of that situation is a little bit out of our control, but we're continuing to have those conversations. And we take this data next month. Nick and I are headed to a conference called Jumpstart. We're going to be meeting with between 10 and 12 airlines. I joke, it's literally like speed dating. You get 15 minutes with each one, and you go from table to table, and you got to make your pitch. It's a lot of work, and from that is really where Frontier and those conversations really kickstarted last year at the program. So that's coming up, and hopefully we'll have more news in the next 6 to 8 months.
So as you can see, we're data centric. We love data. We talk about data all the time. When you purchase a ticket and you live within about a 3-hour radius of the airport, we know that you're purchasing a ticket, whether you fly out of Leahy BTV or not. And that's how we look at some of this information to change some of our marketing strategies, but also to encourage growth right here out of our region. Why drive to Boston or somewhere else to fly to the same destinations that we have? We even look at average ticket sales prices, and we know that Boston right now is only about $20 more on an average ticket price. Now, when you compare international versus international out of Leahy BTV, ticket prices can be significantly different. But we're looking at a domestic U.S. market at this point in time, and that this image right here is exactly why we look at that. We look at scheduled seats to make sure that we see what the projected future looks like. The dashed blue line is really the highlight of this slide right here. Left side is raw data in case you want to dive into it a little bit further. But that dashed blue line, which you can see pops above many of these other lines, especially in September and October of this year, are the projected seats scheduled out of BTV. Not necessarily passengers, but the projected seats leaving Leahy BTV. That dashed blue line is higher than any year in the history of the commercial operations out of the airport. Last year, the green line, we also hit the highest year. So we're looking at an extremely large capacity change for this calendar year 2025. In the chart, in the top left chart or the box on the line graph there, you can also see that over the years from 2008 to 2025 today, our average seats per flight are changing pretty dramatically. Back in 2008, which was the highest total year that we've ever had at the airport, the average per flight was only about 70 seats on an aircraft, smaller planes. 2025, we're now looking at an average number of seats on that plane of 92. So those planes are getting bigger, more efficient, and they're fuller. And you can reference on that bottom right box there that the percentage of passengers filling these seats are between 86 and 82% year over year, and from 2008, which only saw the 75%. So lots of data on this particular slide, but it's really I'm really excited about it because you can see growing aircraft size and growing seats being filled, and that equates to more passengers. Bottom left corner of the chart on the left-hand side, we're projecting about 730,000 outbound passengers this year. Multiply that by 2, and that's the total number of passengers in and out of Leahy BTV, which is a very, very strong number. 750 was our 2008-2009 number, so we're getting very, very close, and certainly over 2019, which is our pre-pandemic benchmark of 705.
Any movement on getting service back to Boston?
Some, not as much as the conversations that we talk about New York capacity. Boston is a very tough market for us. The data is really tough to get a hold of. We know where people are flying out of Boston to go and fly domestically. We just don't know how many people would fly or drive to Boston.
I meant for reestablishing flight service from Burlington to Boston.
Yeah, we had service back in the 80s and 90s to Boston, and we recently had service on a very, 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 very small plane. It had 8 seats on that particular plane. On a Pilatus PC-12 single engine propeller plane. It was a fun flight, but it was that flight was not filled, and it was really, really tough market. But New York, it's not off the table, and New York is more of our strategic demand. We know with the loss of JetBlue, even though our numbers continue to climb with passengers, we haven't seen any blip in our service and our demand, even with the loss of JetBlue. It saddens me. And of course, there's millions of miles of JetBlue miles in our area, and that's where we're really trying to connect with JetBlue. But getting New York City capacity on the 3 airports is a very, very important next step for us. And like Jeff said, sometimes uncontrollable with other reasons.
Has Newark been problematic for you as well?
No. Well, yes, Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia are all kind of seeing some of the air traffic control constraints and what the FAA put on, not as a requirement, but as a reduction in service based on limited air traffic controllers in the area to reduce the congestion in that area. A little bit of background of myself. Prior to coming to the airport, I was an air traffic controller down in the New York City area, and it was very busy 20 years ago. And I know I have college friends that still work there right now, and it's very busy down there. And that reduction of service was necessary. But FAA is changing things. In fact, the Newark area airport, specifically the airspace, has recently transitioned over to the Philadelphia air traffic controllers. That way the congestion starts evening out a little bit. This next set of slides is talking about Project Next, our North Expanded Terminal. This annex, if you've ever flown out of our gates 3 through 6 area, this area, very skinny hallway that has 4 gates down there, was designed 25 years ago and designed for 50-seat passenger aircraft down there. 50 seats times 4 gates, about 200 passengers in and out on that aircraft. Now one of those gates houses an Airbus 320, sometimes a 321, that can house 200 seats on a single plane. Multiply that times 4. All of a sudden, an area designed for 200 people is now housing about 1,000 people at a time. It does not work for us. And it does not work for many departments for us. Congestion on the inside, congestion on the exterior of the building. The planes are getting too long. We've actually restricted the size of aircraft sitting at some of these gates, especially when our FAA inspector said that's too close to an area that it can't be. So we have to make operational considerations when we look at why we're building Project Next and making sure we're building for the flexibility of the future of the airport. These 4 gates will be demolished after our Project Next is expanded so that we can build and right-size the terminal building for what the future is. Whether it gets smaller aircraft, we don't know what that 10, 20, 30-year forecast of commercial aviation looks like. Larger aircraft, maybe vertical takeoff and landing electric aircraft. We want to build in a terminal that can accommodate all of that type. And we also want to build this sustainably. I think many of you heard already that this new building will have geothermal to heat and cool the building. All of the steel, if you've driven by the airport recently, is up. And there's not that much steel right there. The rest of it is mass timber products, which should be delivered in the next couple of weeks and start being installed.
It's supposed to be
Next Monday. And then the rooftop is really exciting, not just to house our future electric, our photovoltaic and solar field on the top there, but also to invite the public up to the roof. This is going to be pre-security, a rooftop garden style area that anybody can go out there without going through security and visit this rooftop area. It's pretty amazing. It took a lot of work and a lot of creativity to get through some Homeland Security and FAA requirements, but this will be looking towards the east or towards Mount Mansfield and Camel's Hump and bring back that nostalgia of our observation tower, which is now behind security and not accessible. It's only stairs.
It's gone?
It's still there.
You can't get there.
You can still get there if you could walk those stairs and find out where it is, and you're gonna have luggage with you and all sorts of things. So it's still open.
If I could also add, part of the 3rd floor, that's going to be our office space. So we're much more accessible to the general public, but we're going to have a dedicated event space as well. My team particularly has had a wonderful working relationship with your Parks and Rec department. And we've already had discussions about how to leverage that for community gatherings, community events. We held a block party, spooktacular in October at Carnes Arena when we flew in our new mascot by helicopter, and the collaboration was awesome. And I know we are working to host a 5K on the airfield this September, working with the South Burlington team. So it's been a lot of fun, and the creativity is definitely there.
And the collaboration of building this building is really important. Here's another image of the mass timber products, Vermont maple on the ceiling, polished concrete. We want it to look Vermont. We want it to be what this airport is meant to be, but also bring in the modern aspects and, again, that flexibility of what our airlines need. But when we build this building, and of course when we build vertical, there's also landscaping requirements and components associated with it. It's very difficult to build landscaping adjacent to this building. As you can imagine, we're surrounded by parking positions for the aircraft and the roadways on the other side. I don't have an image up here, but hopefully all of you have heard that we also are investing into the community and the land across the street from the airport and building a multi-use pedestrian bike walking path across the airport from pretty much Kennedy Drive all the way across over to Airport Parkway, way over there.
And we'll be before the DRB tomorrow night here to present that project, although we've already presented in a master plan level, but we're getting into sketch and site plan approval right now. And it'll, upon the completion of that, we intend on having that built this year, or most of it.
And overall, this is a very quick drawing associated with the future of our terminal building. The yellow sections of this image would be removed from the building. That furthest right-hand yellow section, that's that annex that I was just referencing, that's coming down first. And then the two pink areas will be built to make a more linear terminal building. So again, so we can accommodate the future of our airline fleet and make sure that we have the flexibility that we need. I'm going to hand it right over to Larry for a noise compatibility program update, and we're good on time.
I'll go quick.
I think you're good because we have an hour. No, we had
30.
30 minutes. 30 minutes.
Don't give Nick an hour.
Oh, let me start again.
Next slide, please. Okay, as everybody's aware, over the past year and a half, we've been updating our noise exposure map with real data from the F-35s being here solidly for over a year. That's been completed, just received FAA approval a few months ago, and we're setting up for, next slide, please.
There's a larger image of this map too on the back end of this presentation in case you want to see it.
Which goes along with our noise compatibility program, which allows us to offer programs other than what had happened in the past with respect to tearing down housing. We have the purchase assurance programs, sales assurance programs, and residential sound insulation programs. We've been mostly reaching out for residential sound insulation program. We started over 5 years ago working on that. In 3 and 4 years ago, we worked through a pilot program where we did 15 homes. Last year, we hit a little setback and challenge with a window manufacturer going bankrupt that provides these specialty windows. However, we've come back from that and we have 68 houses under construction for home improvements with sound insulation, windows, HVAC, doors. That's all going on this year. The graph you're looking at now only represents 52 because that was phase 3. However, we received an additional grant for 15 more homes or 16 more homes in phase 4, which is under contract, which brings you up to the 68. And then we just recently applied for a grant this year for 7 additional homes that almost complete us in the 70 DNL level and higher that want these programs. And we are moving on to, let me get the numbers straight here. We are currently doing outreach for 220 units, 142 of them in Winooski, 19 in Burlington, and 59 units in South Burlington. We also had a challenge with respect to the FAA and the acoustical testing requirement. That got a little bit more stringent and a little bit more expensive, so that hit us along with the window manufacturer. However, that's been straightened out, and now we're set up to do all this outreach and design up to 100 homes and get back into construction as soon as we get those designs done, which will happen over the next year.
And what Larry's referencing, every time we do a sound insulation project on these homes, we have to do a pre-acoustical test to make sure that the interior noise level meets a federal threshold. And if it doesn't, then it is eligible for sound insulation like those windows and doors. After the installation of the product, we do another acoustical test to make sure that those new materials accomplished what the federal goals were. Originally, our sound insulation pre-acoustical testing was to sample specific homes within whatever area that we're going to be doing next. The FAA approved that. These first couple of phases, we were able to do so, and the FAA kind of gave a blanket approval associated with the same type, the same build, in the same zone, if you will. Well, the FAA's rules have since changed, and now they require pre- and post-acoustical testing on every single home, which of course lengthens the time, increases the cost, and limits some of the number of houses that we're able to do on a particular year.
But we're also entering the 65 DNL to 70, where we're, wrapping up the 70 DNL and higher.
So does this say that there are 18 homes in South Burlington that are either in construction or are done?
Right now, there's, actually, there were 15 completed in South Burlington under the pilot programs. Okay. There's 68 in South Burlington that are contracted to be done this year, of which I think there's 21 of them have been touched of those first 52, and the balance of the 52 and the additional grant we received last year for the 16 are all planned to be constructed this year.
And I apologize, this chart looks a little bit small. I think when I converted to PDF, the formatting changed on me, so we can make sure you have this updated information, but this is all on btvsound.com, and we present this monthly at the Airport Commission meeting.
And it changes every day, every week. During our construction meeting, we do updates on this.
So if a home fails the 75 decibel level test, then they're eligible to have this work to get them down to 45.
It's actually the 45 decibel test. So when we do the pre-acoustical testing, we need to make sure the interior noise levels is at or higher than the 45 decibels. Then they're eligible. But other than that, your explanation is correct.
You can get down. Okay.
Yep.
I want to clarify one thing. All homes have been in South Burlington so far because they are in the closest vicinity of the airfield. So.
And now we're working towards that next band, which will now include Winooski and other communities. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think everybody's aware we have a live website where we put in 3 sound measuring devices. One in Winooski, right at the town office. One in Williston, right on Williston Road, and one in South Burlington at Chamberlain. And you can visit that anytime and see what the sound levels are. With a little bit of it isn't exactly on time with respect to flights, but the flights run about 10 minutes behind their actually time. So if you hear something, you can go to that site, and by the time you get to it, you can probably see what you heard. So
that includes military flights?
Right.
It does.
Well, you can hear the military flights. I mean, you can see the sound level,
right?
But they're not on the radar. The commercial flights are.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the military flights are on this. So the first aircraft in the set of aircraft you can see on this flight tracking data. It's kind of all over the place because some of the radar doesn't work. Or maybe it does work the way it was intended to. But this is almost live data. It's a 10-minute delay. We're not allowed to share live data based on the FAA rules. I don't understand exactly why, because you can see almost live data on other applications, but with federal funding, we're not allowed to do that.
And you can also leave a comment if you've heard something or wanted to make a comment with regard to sound or whatever you want to make a comment about. We report this to our Airport Commission monthly on how many comments we've received, and so.
All right, into our sustainability, a big slide of a tower and a tree in there. This is actually an extremely proud year for us because we spent the last 2 years studying how much carbon does the airport emit, not just on our fleet, our own fleet, but our tenants' fleet and our partner fleet, ground equipment. But we also studied all aircraft flying in and out of the airport. The carbon accreditation process, this is done through the American Council International. It's the only worldwide airport carbon program. Studies every single one of these, but they don't require studying aircraft operations in the air, only up to 3,000 feet beyond their origin. We studied every aircraft operation all the way to 3,000 feet at the destination airport. So when we're talking Philly, DC, Charlotte, all those flights, we studied the carbon emissions for almost the entire flight of the operation. That data is then reported in our baseline study, which allowed us to receive a level 1 carbon accreditation. We're the second airport in New England to receive that carbon accreditation. Boston is also performing in this program, and there's other various airports throughout the country and throughout the world that are participating in this program. It's not easy. It's taken a significant amount of time, significant team time, to not just account for gas usage in the buildings and our fleet usage and our scope 3 emissions, which are kind of those things that we don't control, like tenant aircraft and outside of our entities. We're going to continue to do it. There's 7 levels to this accreditation process. As I told the team, level 1 is step 1 of a never-ending project. We need to reach each one of these milestones. Level 2 being an active reduction in carbon accreditation. And that's one of the reasons why we are starting transitioning our own fleet. The things that we can control immediately, we've switched. We're one of the only airports that I know of that are using active electric vehicles to inspect their runways and use every piece of material that we can out on our airport with an electrification. One of our struggles is charging these electric vehicles and making sure we have enough capacity to charge each one of those. And that's where our friends at Beta Technology comes into play. We struggle to find and install enough chargers to recover those fleet. That's just a small portion of our electric fleet. But Beta, especially with their charging chargers, their boxes that you see in this image right here, are also capable of charging our fleet. So using their innovation and help and guidance, we're able to access their electrification for our vehicles as well as, of course, their vehicles. As I mentioned, this is not the end to our electrification, not the end to our sustainability. We have a long road ahead of us for this particular year to actively reduce our carbon emissions. All of this data is presented in not just our sustainability report online, but also our greenhouse gas emission report that we recently published last year. We're going to update that, and we're going to continue to make sure that we provide communities and the public with as much information as we continue the road of reduction.
Yeah, we're working on the second level right now.
So how do you reduce scope 3 emissions?
Great question. So there's many different ways that we can reduce scope 3. Procedurally, we can ask and then require our airline partners, because as you can imagine, the majority of jet fuel is associated with airline operations. We can ask them to plug into our electric jet bridges. Instead of, if you've ever been waiting on an aircraft or waiting in the terminal and you hear kind of an engine noise, it's not the engines that you see or the nacelles that you see. It's an auxiliary engine in the back of the aircraft, a generator, and it powers all of the electricity that they need to set up their computers and their flight systems, etc. But we are installing jet bridges that have that same capability of powering their aircraft without running their auxiliary power units. Now, we can't control every single procedure that they have in place, but at least it gives them the opportunity to plug in. And we have signs all across our terminal that ask the captains to not run APUs. Please plug into our jet bridges. We're installing new jet bridges as well as part of Project Next and as part of the building that we just opened a couple of years ago that have that capability. The biggest reduction that we can see, especially in the transition into what Beta is bringing to the aviation community, which will take time to get to the size of aircraft, especially commercially, is fuel, is getting sustainable aviation fuel into the Leahy BTV Airport. That fuel, not just the commodity itself and creating the fuel, sees a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but also the burning of that fuel as well. Reduces sometimes 30, 40 plus percentage of the carbon emissions. Sustainable aviation fuel is an extremely tough commodity to get a hold of, especially on the East Coast. They're manufacturing it in California and on the West Coast, very hard in especially the Northeast. I'm really proud to say we have sustainable aviation fuel just as of a couple of weeks ago at the Burlington Airport. It took a lot of persuasion, a lot of hard work on the team's part, as well as Heritage Aviation, to really go after that type of fuel. And now they have a truck running around the airport providing sustainable aviation fuel for all of our jet owners and operators. It was not an easy task to get that commodity here.
Is that in sufficient quantity? Is that like kind of beta kind of quantities?
It's not in the quantity that we need yet, that's for sure. But it's a pre-mix, so you can mix that type of fuel with jet fuel and still see the reduction in producing the product as well as burning.
And the airlines are amenable. It's not too expensive to.
It is expensive. It's more because it's supply and demand. There's a limited amount of supply of this product, so the cost of the product is a couple of dollars more per gallon. But when you're purchasing 1,000 gallons of fuel, $3-4 is a very expensive decision. Beta Technologies is a client of using sustainable aviation fuel, and we're working with other corporate and commercial operators to do this as well. I can tell you right now, the commercial airline industry is leading the charge in sustainable aviation fuel. They want to make this transition to meet Federal Aviation Administration goals of accessing sustainable aviation fuel for 2030 is the goal. I don't think that's me.
Somebody's got the microphone on.
He was just echoing to make the point.
Did somebody just log on to the meeting?
It looks like what's making noise is SB Zoom 2.
SB Zoom 2.
Still bad? Yeah.
Oh.
There we go.
It was me.
That's better. Yeah.
Sorry.
So, how much carbon dioxide is emitted hauling that fuel from wherever it's created all the way to Burlington?
Yeah, that's a great question. We don't know yet because a lot of it could be pipelined or utilized in the New Jersey area and then hauled up to the Burlington area. A lot of their purchases come from the Albany area or pipeline through that space. So there's those transaction features that we're still studying to make sure we get the quantities up here to alleviate any of those travel emissions.
So where does your fuel come from today? How far away do they haul that from?
Usually Albany or the New York. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to ask about lead-free?
About what?
Lead-free?
I was going to.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So again, we've talked about this before. I know Beta has, done a great job of transitioning their small planes away from leaded fuel, which is awesome because lead is a really toxic substance, as we know. Do you know the status of Heritage and the remaining, lead products in the flight school? And is that something we can pursue?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and even since our last conversation, we want to make sure we pursue it as fast as we possibly can. To your point, just a little bit more of an expansion. 100 low lead fuel is the standard for piston powered or propellered aircraft. The FAA actually does not allow airports or companies to ban 100 low lead. There's been multiple lawsuits throughout the country that are associated with that. However, there's still opportunities to bring in alternate types of fuel or ultra low lead or no leaded style fuel, or in the case of Beta and other companies using automotive fuel specifically for their aircraft. Each aircraft is regulated and designed differently, so there's different reasons that some aircraft can't use that type of fuel. and you have to have a certification to transition out of a specific fuel that the manufacturer requires. However, getting those no leaded style fuels into the airport is a massive priority for Heritage Aviation to offer that solution to tenants. It's a commodity issue as well, making sure they have that commodity to bring up to this area and to sell. We're working with them too on potential self-fueling alternatives so that the cost of those style fuels is reduced in the services provided, right? If you're self-serving fuel similar to a gas station, the cost to serve that fuel could lower a little bit.
Any other questions from councilors? Mike? No?
I have a high-level question. I have a lot of very tactical questions, but I'll hold those, Nick. You had mentioned that I think it's the FAA requires a master plan every 10 to 15 years, and the last one was 2017?
2019 and published in 20. Yep.
And so is there a plan of time frame that you'll be looking at that?
Yeah, right now we're probably going to be doing it in 2035. One of the main components of a master plan is, of course, to look at the capital projects that are needed, and then to associate those projects with federal funding. Right now, we're on a very steady path to fund each one of our requirements year after year through the next 7, 8, 9+ years. Once we start changing those priorities, that's when a master plan is really going to be needed.
Well, thank you. And this, I have to say, I found this fascinating and very exciting and really reflective of some of the feedback that the Economic Development Project is getting as well. So I'm really happy for the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, if I understand correctly, and kudos if my understanding is correct, that you move the bike path project up from the end of your project to the front end of it. So thank you very much for creating that opportunity for our community and those who live closest to the airport, but also adding to our bike path network throughout the city at no cost to the city. So thank you very much.
We want to build it as soon as possible.
I had the question.
Build it this year.
This year. I heard you say this year, so this is why I'm giving the kudos, because I initially remembered it was going to be at the end of the project. I was just trying to think a little bit about what Lori asked about the funding issue. I was just thinking, is there a flip side to that, given your presentation, which was fantastic, and you emphasized not only the growth in passengers, but you emphasized also the many businesses that are working on your site, and as I understand, potentially for growth in those business. For us, that is the positive element in terms of we're all facing a possible shift in funding and the reduction of federal funding and revenue, and our goal to maintain affordability as was reflected in our last budget, real an effort to do that. It seems that the environment in these businesses and growth in terms of local option tax, in terms of the property tax that has the potential for growth going forward and offsetting, if not adding to the revenue and helping keep South Burlington affordable.
Agreed.
Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, 100%. And everything we do, of course, has a direct and indirect impact and an impact to you. A great example of that is making sure, a good example of that is our car rental industry. We run an airport, but our car rental industry is $40 million a year in gross sales just inside the terminal building. When we continue to advocate not just for an electric fleet of rental cars, but space and opportunities for their growth, there are associated taxes and other fees associated with their operation as well. Maybe that's a big example, but we have so many of those examples across the board. Pratt & Whitney, Heritage, Vermont Flight Academy, you name it. We have dozens of industries associated with the airport that are really doing well right now, and the industry is really doing well, which is refreshing to hear right now.
And very good for us to hear that from a revenue standpoint as we are facing headwinds.
I'd also like to add, we have just paid to the city of South Burlington approximately $750,000 in permitting fees for Project Next, which is a significant amount between the fire department and planning and zoning.
Speaking of fire department, we heard this great operation of our team with its neighbors, and one of the neighbors that we always benefit is the fire department from the Vermont National Guard as a benefit to our city at no cost to our city.
Yeah.
I just have a question. If the Vermont National Guard, because they have to service you, you need to have flight. If they were not there, you would have to fund that yourself?
That's right, and we're just with Chief Soder, the fire chief over at the Vermont Air National Guard, which was a mutual responder in that terrible event, as well as many other events across the city. Everything that we do requires a fire department. Any commercial operation, airline operation, requires a very strict set of standards for not just training personnel, but also equipment. The annual operating cost of that department is probably $5 to $6 million a year. Our budget for the airport, which we are a City of Burlington department, in enterprise fund, we have our own budget. Every dollar that we make at that airport stays at that airport is about $24 million a year in annual operating budget. If you add $6 million to that budget, that's a significant increase that would ultimately go right back to the airlines and increase ticket prices and other fees associated with that type of service. We don't do that right now. We have that huge competitive advantage by lowering our airline rates. In fact, we're the lowest in our region by not having to pay for the services of a fire department, because the Air National Guard provides that at no cost to the city, as it provides at no cost to other mutual aid responses. And in exchange, we receive a significant amount of help from your department as well when we need those services. Mutual aid, that's exactly what that terminology is. And in our case, the benefit of receiving that aid at no cost.
And the stats that Chief Soder gave us today was they, on an annual basis, have about 1,200 calls that they go on, and 80 to 85% of them are off the airport. If we had to take over the fire service, based on rules, FAA, etc., the fire department could not leave the airport. They would have to stay, and they would not be able to service the surrounding communities.
So the service that we would receive from them would also go away because you could not do that. Okay. Well, let's hope that relationship that benefits everyone continues. Just one last question. Transportation, parking lot. I know we keep it macro, but the parking lot is fifth floor.
Did I skip
always.
over that part?
Fifth floor always. I was just wondering, in terms of also one of the goals we have in our community is to try to get people out of single occupancy cars.
Yeah.
And GMT. Is there a possibility? I actually flew in the other day, and first of all, I want to say going through TSA at Burlington is the greatest joy in the world. It is so quick and efficient relative to anywhere else you connect to. But I went up and talked to some people who are waiting for the bus. And every time I go there, I look to see if the people, and I ask them. And the question always becomes timing and frequency. Yep. And is this a discussion that you're able to have? Is it possible? I know that the talks, the late night flights, early morning flights, but is there any sort of, has there ever been any study or thought on what would it take to make it a win-win for GMT, for you, but also for all of us to get people out of, giving people other options?
Yeah, great question. Let me start with parking garage. So 5 weeks essentially out of the year, we are maxed out in our parking. Especially late last year and this year, anytime there's a school break or a holiday, we see an extensive amount of parkers. Single occupancy cars, probably not a lot of, but an extensive amount of parkers. For the first time in almost 20 years, we are going to be changing our rates in our parking garage effective July 1st. And there's kind of a twofold picture to that. One, we know that maybe there will be a reduction in cars parking in that garage, or in other words, cars or families or business travelers choosing to take a car share program or a public transportation program versus bringing their car and parking it in the parking lot. Maybe a small portion of that. The bus service is a continued conversation that we have, not just with GMT, but also with our tenants and our employees at the airport that really could utilize that service of coming into work every single day. Taxi services, believe it or not, our airport commission manages taxi operations at the airport as well. And we're trying to grow that entity. These are small businesses, single owner operator operations, many refugees that do use that as their primary source of income. We've actually worked with the cab companies and the taxi companies to increase some of their fares and to encourage overnight operation, meaning after 7 p.m., maybe there's a small surcharge. That way the taxi operator can continue to grow their operation and, again, utilize those car sharing programs. And then there's additional updates on TNC operators or transportation network companies.
Yeah, it's very timely because I did an interview and a research project for WCAX last week. The story may have aired today or tomorrow. We're getting complaints about Uber and Lyft, particularly late at night, and it's we hear it as well. We monitor social media and our comments pretty closely, and so I dove into the numbers, and I was happy because we see increasing passengers. You're going to need these services, but we saw year over year in Q1 a 25.5% increase in Uber and Lyft trips. That was over 1,200 in the month of March alone. If you compare Q1 to Q1 of 25 to 23, it was a 55% increase. So our passengers understand that we have challenges in the parking garage, particularly in those 5 weeks, and they're trying to find other creative solutions. Perhaps they're students, but we are maximizing the Uber and Lyft capacity currently in our market. And so if somebody's looking for an extra job or some extra cash, it might be something they want to explore. But particularly with those the Uber and Lyft, it's late night because, again, these are people with these are mainly second jobs. They'll turn on their fares at 5 a.m. when they get out, and then what are they doing at 12? They're in bed getting ready for the next day of work. So it is just one of the challenges we have of a growing passenger capacity to increase flights. So we got a lot of work to do.
Well, thank you. I share the view. Very impressive and very excellent partner for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I want to thank you for your presentation. A little bit of history. I joined the council in 2016. There have been some tenuous times in the relationship between South Burlington and the airport, and you've had your own interesting situations with the city of Burlington, prior to that. Once the property tax situation was resolved, once we've had an evolution in management, and I think we've seen some incredible structural growth going on, right, with your terminal changes and your TSA changes, and you've survived the pandemic. And so I think we all understand that you are an economic engine for Chittenden County and as part of this region with Burlington and South Burlington. So we look forward to another report with even better numbers.
Perfect.
Yeah, knock on some of that mass wood.
The mass
wood, right? So
yeah, and we can't do it without great partners and without great partnerships with Jessie and her team. It's really fantastic working with South Burlington.
Great. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we're going to move on to item 9, which is receive an overview and hold the discussion of Act 181, which is, quote, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection through land use. The draft regional future land use map, the FLU, proposed housing targets and activity tiers receive a recommendation from the Planning Commission to consider taking action to request an activity tier 1B status be included in the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission's regional map for submittal to State Land Use Review Board under Act 181.
Okay, so pause. Time out.
I'm out.
So this is going to be a long conversation. So I would recommend we take a quick break while Paul gets situated. Like 3 minutes.
3 minutes. All right, we're going to take a 3-minute break.
All right, so I want to do just a teeny bit of table setting here. So while this is a really big and exciting conversation, not just for South Burlington, but all of the municipalities across the state following the adoption of 47-181 by the legislature last year. I think it's particularly exciting to us because it is a continuation of a conversation we've been having in this community, at least since I've been here, with the adoption of the City Plan 2024, the 2023 land development regulation updates, the form-based code updates that are currently before the Planning Commission, and directly addresses both our priorities of addressing the impacts of climate change and our housing crisis. I think we are really uniquely situated in Vermont. We as South Burlington are really uniquely situated in Vermont to lead in this conversation. And what I mean by that is, as the targets are established statewide, I think we have a really unique opportunity to, with our municipal partners, go to the state, go to the legislature and say, to achieve these targets, these are the changes we need to see. These are 25-year targets. We have a runway. We have intentional ability to go and be part of that solution, whether that's regulatory change, zero interest loans, grant programs, designations, things like that. So I think I think this is kind of the culmination of a lot of the work we've been doing as a community over the last couple of years. I do want to give Paul a huge thank you for his work in working with the Regional Planning Commission and with the planning directors in the other cities and towns to come to agreement on these targets. This is, we talk about regional partnership. I think this is a really great example of Paul leading in that regional conversation. So I'm excited to officially bring you this presentation. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
And that about wraps it up.
There you go. Back on stage.
No. Thank you for the table setting. In the vein of the regional partnerships, we have Charlie Baker, Executive Director of the Regional Planning Commission here, and Taylor Newton, who is the Planning Program Manager, who have been instrumental in bringing our communities together, both within Chittenden County, but frankly leading the statewide conversation on this as well. So there were two acts passed in the last couple of years, Act 47 and Act 181. There's a lot in them, and they have a lot of different components to them. So there's an Act 250 component to them. There's a housing target component to them. There was a whole municipal zoning component that we took care of last year in them. Creates a new state-level land use review board to oversee Act 250 as well as the regional mapping. And importantly, it sort of tightens the structure of how municipalities and regions and the state work together to achieve common goals is sort of the framework of it. There's a lot in here, as I said. What we're going to be talking about tonight include the draft future land use map at the regional level, the housing targets, and then opportunities for the city in terms of Act 250, the newly called tiers. What together they do and how we look at it from how staff is looking at it from a South Burlington perspective is that the regional future land use map is really closely aligned to our work. I don't know that that's necessarily the case in every community in the state, but we've been doing quality planning work that jives with quality planning work that the Regional Plan and Planning Commission have been advancing. There are housing targets. We'll talk about them in greater detail later, but in the presentation, but essentially the Act laid out a structure whereby the state provided to each region a housing target, and then it's up to each region to allocate those by municipality for 2030, but really for 2050. From a planning perspective, 2030 is next week. So we've really been focused on the 2050. And we think that, as Jesse was saying, this really presents an opportunity for us to be, with some runway, really thinking about the structural challenges, demographic challenges, the opportunities to be efficient with our money and to really meet our climate goals as a region. And then you see the other notes in here about economic development, opportunity to focus regional and statewide investment. We know that there aren't going to be dramatically more dollars moving forward, so we really need to be thinking about how do we be thoughtful to not only keep the systems like transit that we have alive, but how do we make them resilient and financially stable long term. So first section I'm going to be speaking about is the regional future land use map. I'm happy to dive into detail at any point, or afterwards we can pull up interactive versions of the map too. So just let us know. At a very high level, this is a tool that Charlie and Taylor's team came up with, along with the state, to sort of categorize. The new state law says that regions must develop new future land use maps using these and only these 11 categories. And then the various benefits programs, specifically the designations we've been in the past and are still a new town center and a neighborhood development area, they get streamlined and put into a couple of categories of centers and neighborhoods, which fall out of the 4 of the categories here. And then you've probably heard a lot of conversation about Act 250 and various different tiers. So status quo is essentially tier 2. Tier 1, A and B, are providing opportunities for exemptions to Act 250, either partially or fully. And then tier 3, which we're not going to really speak about tonight because it doesn't really affect South Burlington, is area where there is a potentially higher level of Act 250 review, but that's in much more rural parts of Vermont, so we're really not going to focus on that. So for us, we're talking about tier 2 and the tier 1s. There's a lot going on in this map. This is in the draft as presented by the Regional Planning Commission of how the region, the whole county, looks in these future land use categories. The one in the center is the draft map itself. It has an interactive comment tool. The council is welcome to provide feedback as well. On the right-hand side is basically that same map but simplified. We took all of the rural categories and just put them into one color. So it just is a little less difficult to follow. And then you can see the breakdown on a county level of the area of the land and how it's designated. This aligns with a lot of work that's been happening for a decade, 2 decades at the regional level about really targeting to have the overwhelming majority of future housing and development taking place in a small portion of the land areas, either in our core Chittenden County communities or in the villages around the region. If I'm saying anything that sounds wrong, please just jump in and jump right over me. The next slides here are the draft as they relate to South Burlington. So there's a lot going on in this, and I might pop over in a second to an interactive map if you want to see it in a little more detail. But basically, the dark purple that you see in the middle of the screen here, that's our current city center area. It is essentially the neighborhood development area, and that would be called a downtown in the program. There's a darker medium purple, and there's 3 of them in the city, and that is a new designation that are being considered as village centers. So these are areas where we see the opportunity at a regional level and at a local level to focus future centers in the city. So the one that we've really been looking at and that you submitted a municipal planning grant for application for last month is the Shelburne Road area centered on Fayette Road, and thinking about, as our own city plan talks about, how do we start to create a focal point to that part of the city? So that becomes sort of an anchor to everything around it. There are 2 others in our community, one that is split in Burlington and South Burlington, which is around the Market 32 and the Shaw's Plaza, and Farrell Street, where there's already some of the most compact housing in the state. And then an additional one that was discussed with our planning commission, and they recommended inclusion, which is at the corner of Kennedy and Kimball Avenue, the very northern tip of the O'Brien neighborhood that is under development. That area is approved for multi-story and mixed-use buildings, and is really the opportunity to connect that whole area up to Williston Road, the transit service in that area, and really sort of create a focal point to that part of the city. The lighter pink are areas called planned growth areas. These are areas that are, generally speaking, on a region-wide level, served by water and sewer. They are intended to be areas that are, as the title indicates, planned for growth. They may be either residential or commercial, it doesn't really get down to that level of detail. That's up to our municipal plan. And so you'll see, and our local zoning, you'll see that this includes things like Shelburne Road or the Orchards neighborhood, as well as Tech Park. And those, from a regional level, at least in this draft map, are all shown as shared growth areas. Those three categories are the principal categories that we can get benefits from Act 250 on. So hold that in mind for a few minutes. The remaining categories, there are several different rural ones in South Burlington. The colors are green and yellow and sort of an aquamarine. There are different designations of rural in terms of level of conservation that exists, or whether they're working lands or if they're in current use programs. Functionally, and correct me if I'm wrong, but functionally they're all very similar. It's just showing them differently. So I put them sort of all in one category. And then the last two remaining are there's one category called the transition area. They exist in a few places in the region. There's only one proposed in South Burlington. That's in Country Club Estates. And that's really, transition is sort of a state designation for it is missing a component of being one of the other categories. And so the community and the region are invited to and encouraged to think about and plan for how does that area change in the future. What this one is missing back there is it's not connected really to anything. It's not connected to parks or services or stores or really much of anything. And so it didn't appropriately fit in any other category. Fair warning, I don't have a magic bullet for how to transition that one, but it's identified in that direction. And then the last one is the airport itself, which falls into sort of its own category other. And then a very small amount of land north of the airport in the Ethan Allen Industrial Park and along Burrard Drive that is categorized as enterprise, which is really largely disconnected business-only areas. So, yeah. Sure.
Let's see if I can get this. So I was looking at the enterprise area, and then also looking at the area where OnLogic, et cetera, are located, and wondering why that area is not also indicated as enterprise as opposed to
that is a great question. We had a spirited debate amongst the three of us as to which one we would advocate for as a community and present. And I think we concluded from the staff level, we also spoke with the Planning Commission a little bit about this, and they concurred that it could fall potentially either way. The difference is the planned growth areas are eligible for Act 250 benefits. The enterprise areas are not. So if in the future we would like to see opportunities to have Tier 1B status or Tier 1A status where there's the alleviated burden of the additional process of Act 250, only planned growth areas get that benefit under current legislation. So
then it would raise the question for me why the northern area doesn't want that same benefit.
Because it's so much more disconnected. That's the fundamental geographical difference, although this is not set in stone as a map, and it's ultimately up to the Land Use Review Board. So if it's the council's recommendation that we try to put that into planned growth area too, I'm not opposed to it.
Paul, and I think one of the main distinctions
Can you come up here so that people online can...
I think one of the main
You
distinctions
have to
there was
identify
that
yourself too.
I will do that as well. I'm Taylor Newton. I'm the planning program director at CCRPC. I think the one difference too is just the lack of bike ped connectivity. I think with Tech Park, we have sidewalks, multi-use paths serving that area from a center. We didn't necessarily have that with the area north of the airport.
Well, I understand that, and we also have a number of residential people that are living in that part of town, and having them disconnected and remain disconnected is not a good it's not a good metric, particularly for given the residential makeup at that part of town. And so I have a concern that we're sort of saying, we'll leave that as the hinterlands when it's an important constituent of our community.
Can I clarify, Larry? I'm sorry, can I clarify, Lori, what section you're talking about here?
Yes, if you look north of the airport, you'll see the sort of lavender colored area, which is on the legend, it's called Enterprise Area,
Right
as
here?
opposed to the planned
Or all
growth
of this?
area.
Oh, all of this. Okay. Yeah,
And
thank
so
you.
that includes where the fire was this last weekend. That includes all the housing projects that are out there.
Yeah.
And
One clarification, Lori, the housing at the very northern tip is in the planned growth area. It's just hard to see in the map. I'll zoom in there, and the colors are very similar. But as soon as it hits commercial, you're right, it absolutely does change.
But if I can just drill down maybe on a component of what Laura is saying, why would we not want to maintain all flexibility for the future and access to resources that we may ever never change it? It may be enterprise, maybe operations related to the airport will position their warehousing, whatever. And as you said, we ultimately control it by our own zoning. What we're trying to do by getting these labels is the possibility of greater flexibility and perhaps access to resources. Why would we not want to maximize it? It's sort of the same rationale why you said for Tech Park. Maybe we're missing something.
The only, Charlie Baker from the RPC staff, the only thing I'll add, and I think the challenge that we're having is the statutory definition and meeting all the criteria for it. So we'll take another look at that area. If we can get it in, I think we'll look at trying to get it in. If we can't make a convincing argument to the state board that has to approve it, that's really the litmus test, is can that land use review board buy into that definition in that location, or is it not meeting the criteria?
having canvassed that part of the city when I was running last year, I can say that a number of the people that live in the residence behind the airport feel like the stepsister that's forgotten about, and everybody talks about connectivity, and they're like, "What about us?"
Right.
And
Just to clarify, though, that the lavender is not residential, right? The lavender is commercial. It's the transition that's the residential.
no, if you look, the whole
there's-
residential area behind the airport is lavender as
No,
well.
isn't that the yellow?
So
There's the country club estates,
Yeah, please.
but there's
Residential areas.
yeah, but there's also the other residential.
But the
area there.
lavender incorporates residential, or still commercial.
So the where the fire was this weekend, that small residential area, I hate giving it that label, but is in the planned growth area. That's the sort of pink on the map that's in front of your screen right now. But as soon as that turns to commercial, then it's the enterprise right now in the
Right,
draft.
so just to be clear, the lavender, is there residential in the lavender?
Yeah, that's multifamily residential there.
Not so lavender is the one that includes Ethan Allen Park. So just we're talking about the same color.
The enterprise area.
Get the
Why don't
colors
we
right.
just use the terms?
You show
Right.
where you're
The enterprise area, does that include residential? Is that all commercial?
That is all commercial.
Right, so it's all commercial. Okay, because the area you're talking about, Lori, I think is the yellow.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right. And I think that area we've looked pretty closely at it. Transition we think is the right label because it is missing something, and it is incumbent on all of us to figure out how to connect it in the future. There isn't a clear, we've got a great answer to it today, and so transition is the way to highlight its importance of connecting it and not having it feel like a forgotten part of the game.
Thanks for that clarification.
Let me just if one of the words you're using is connection, whether from the sliver that you talked up there above the enterprise or the currently labeled transition, if the connection is to be to South Burlington, it is going to have to go through the enterprise area. So again, I am just trying to say, in life, if you can maximize flexibility and access to resources, why not?
Right.
It doesn't mean we'll go that way, but at least it gives us more.
I think part of the challenge in this area is there's connection in terms of putting a bike path in, but there's also what are the resources that serve a neighborhood. And right now, while that commercial area is there, the things that are in that area are not really beneficial to that neighborhood. They help from a tax perspective, but they're not parks, they're not restaurants, they're not things that are directly
I mean, just a speaking point, perhaps to argue this to the state, is that that is actually where our only brewery in South Burlington is. If you think about it.
And that connects all of us.
To Mike's point, though, if we want to, again, I'm just thinking out loud to give you speaking points. If we want to maximize the flexibility, try and get it into planned unit or planned growth, maybe that's how we start thinking about it, is how do we create it as a little arts district back in that industrial area, which seems more like the planned growth area than like the transition area.
Another Pine Street.
No,
area.
it's okay. I mean,
Another Pine Street for South Burlington.
That means we have two breweries?
Oh, we only have the one.
What's the one down by Bartlett Bay? Isn't it Zero Gravity?
Yeah, but that's just a warehouse. It's not a.
They don't brew in there?
Zero
Gravity does brew.
They
Keep
might
going.
brew, but you can't go there.
Okay, keep going.
Sorry to interrupt you.
All good. So I guess this is a good pause point to talk a little bit about the future land use map and its relationship to our own map. Let me just get my slideshow back. So as I said before, there's centers, which we've talked about, areas planned for growth in rural areas. A lot in South Burlington, we worked really closely with the RPC to, at a macro level, align especially the distinction between the rurals and the planned growth and centers with the sewer service area that you adopted last year. So largely speaking, those two are aligned. Where they're not entirely aligned is where the scale of the size of the areas that have been excluded from sewer service areas, like a couple of the small habitat blocks in the northern part of the city, or in the context of its surroundings, everything else around it is planned for growth. It, from a regional perspective, having a 20-acre exclusion didn't really match and call it rural. It did because it wasn't permanently conserved. It's just a local designation. But especially in the southern parts of the city where there are more contiguous rural areas, it matches up essentially to our sewer service areas. So that's the alignment there. And that's what you see in those little blue lines there. Do councilors want to discuss the map any further at this point? I'm going to move on to Act 250 jurisdiction otherwise.
I have a question about the map.
Sure.
And I understand that we have the downtown center and the village center and the planned growth areas. When I think about South Burlington and I think about, quote, our housing crisis and how we need to grow, and I think about active transportation and public transportation, in order to effectively utilize all of these components, we really need dense development to grow concentrically so that we are able to build the services that go along with our goals. This map shows the planned growth area everywhere in South Burlington. And if we're not able to gain the density through concentric growth, we're going to just develop the same sprawl that makes it hard to get active transportation or public transportation really working for us. And I look at it and I see continuation of the kind of developments that we've been having in, quote, suburban parts of South Burlington, rather than this new development model that was talked about on the Planning Commission when I was there, and how we envision the city growing. And I'm wondering if there's a way to incorporate that model into this map, because this map misses that.
From my perspective, this map is a higher level than the decisions that we make at the local level to emphasize certain areas, incentivize certain areas, have a variety of density, looking at the categories that exist and that the Regional Planning Commission is mandated to, a lot of these cities' existing neighborhoods, which are captured in here, first of all, already do have water and sewer, and you have made the choice through the Planning Commission and you're, to allow for small-scale infill in those areas. The categories that exist after planned growth area are villages, which have been are very spot local, rural, which doesn't really assign, and then transition. And transition implies that the community doesn't know what they want out of the future. And I think we have done the homework to say we do know what we want. We're shaping the form of that growth in a way that aligns to our goals, but it is in an area that we've determined that is appropriate for water and sewer, and on the terms that we have set makes sense. So that would be my presentation.
So the control I'm talking about comes to our planning and zoning office.
Well, it comes
yes.
through the policies you adopt at the local level.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I make one more point about that? Paul, can you go to slide 6?
This one?
Nope. Yep, that one. Can you zoom in on the map on the right a little more?
Sort of. If you give me the simplified regional one.
So so the slide on the map on the right, the less busy one. To me, I think this is one of the inherent project problems, what you're articulating, Lori, about thinking about this at the regional level. When I look at that, I do see some concentric circles. They're just outside of our town lines. So there's like an oblong down Shelburne Road. There's an oblong down Williston Road that has 2 growth centers, both City Center and what I assume is Taft's Corners. Yeah. So we're trying to like connect those areas. And I think the challenge for us as a community is that, you know, in a much bigger metro area, we would be an entire circle ourselves, and we're fighting that a little bit in our local land regulations. So we're trying to keep the circle that's between those 2 oblongs not lower density. And I think that's just something we need to acknowledge. Our local zoning is doing that through the NRP areas, but the circles on a regional basis, to me, do pop out more when you look at them regionally than when you just look at them on the South Burlington map.
And I also think from just the experience we had with GMT with connecting now City Center, Burlington, and City Center, South Burlington, every 15 minutes by transit, you do the same thing with the Taft Corners, whatever, and you as you were implying to create that frequency option.
Can I ask a question?
You gotta go to a mic, Charlie.
I don't know if they can hear me. Okay.
We've got 15 people online. We want to know what you're
Thank you.
say.
Charlie Baker again. Question, and maybe this is something we could think a little bit more about. I think in our last iteration of our regional plan, we had some transit corridors identified as kind of like boosters on this basic mapping. Would something like that help with the concept that you're trying to get to?
I think that would be helpful, yes.
We will think about that. The state didn't think about that, but we obviously have more transit than the rest of the state. So
I'm thinking of it as connected community density corridors is what I'm thinking of.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is what's happening in reality, just the way you were talking about it, but maybe there's a way to kind of emphasize that a little bit more on the map.
And while South Burlington is sort of on the regional map, we are in the growth area and it's happening around us. At the same time, Vermont is trying to develop its food security roadmap, and agricultural lands are critical, and there are agricultural lands in South Burlington that fall within the growth areas. And if we grow according to what's laid out in this plan, we're going to have a lot more people here in 20 years. And food security is going to continue to be an issue as we watch the changes that are happening locally and nationally internationally. And I want to make sure that we're really, as a community, keeping our eyes on how we strengthen our local food security network, even in our own community. So that all ties into the questions I was raising.
Sorry, you didn't ask a question, but I'm going to respond anyway. Two thoughts on that. One is the scale doesn't allow for really bubbling up that like really urban farming, like which can happen in your backyard, right? Like we're not trying to get down to your 100 foot by 100 foot or 40 foot by 40 foot like ag piece that you like anybody could be doing on these properties in this growth area, right? So and I think within our policy there's not just a map, there's also policies that go along. We want to try to encourage that kind of urban farming if we can, and then the second thing is the macro picture is trying to get more housing units within these growth areas is intended purposefully, right, to take the pressure off of the rural farmlands and keep more of that in production. So I think both at the macro and micro level, the macro is easier to explain here. The micro level, this mapping isn't intended to show what you can do on your own property within the growth area.
And that's visible in the southeast quadrant.
Yeah, right.
That NRP land, the protected, the rural area, right? So that's still there.
No, I get it. Thank you.
Act 250? Okay, I'm going to continue. So, building on the map that you just reviewed here, Act 250 historically has applied sort of oddly in a community like us. There are two basic criteria that have historically applied: any commercial development involving more than 10 acres, which is a pretty big piece of land in our community, especially our commercial areas, or any residential development involving 10 or more homes within 5 miles with it and 5 years by the same developer, which basically means almost everything on the residential side has historically been an Act 250 in our community. The legislature has passed a variety of interim exemptions. They're listed here on the left there. Basically, in various iterations, up to 50 or 75 homes of different kinds on new projects are not subject to Act 250 until 2027. That does not, if a property is in Act 250, it's still subject to Act 250 currently, and I can give you some interesting case studies of that. Under Act 181, there become these tiers that I mentioned before. Tier 1A is a full exemption of Act 250 for the applicable areas. It is something that municipalities have to demonstrate to the Land Use Review Board independently after the RPC has done their map and had it approved. We have to demonstrate that we have certain regulations in place. We have a lot of them in our community. There's a few that we would be that we would need to add, including addressing rare, threatened, endangered species, which has been dealt with at the state level previously. Importantly, also, if we seek Tier 1A status, we would take over enforcement of existing Act 250 permits, and the DRB would be authorized through permit applications that come in to determine which ones remain relevant and which ones are historic and don't need to go away. So we essentially take over that. Tier 1B is essentially a continuation of the interim exemptions. So areas subject to Tier 1B, new projects in less than 10 acres with 50 or fewer homes would be, new projects would be not subject to Act 250. Tier 2 is status quo of the history, and Tier 3, as we talked about, is other parts of the state, but it's developing guidance on additional criteria. What you see here on the left is a compilation of the various different existing interim exemptions. Some of that mapping looks a little bit wonky, especially as you look along Heinsberg Road. It's a statewide map that addresses the blue is transit service, and it is mapped around stops. there is a huge disclaimer on the website that says, please speak to your Act 250 district coordinator for actual site specific. So take that with a grain of salt on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is the same map that you saw a few minutes ago, with only showing the planned growth areas downtown and village centers. So these are the areas that the city, if this map were adopted and approved by the Land Use Review Board, it would be the areas that we would be eligible for Tier 1B status, meaning new projects, 10 or fewer acres, 50 or fewer homes.
So, knowing that proposal, right? What do you think would have happened if those had been in effect when Sadie Lane and Link Road were proposed? Do you think they would have been more than 9 units? I mean, was there enough land that they were dealing with anyway? Or?
Sadie Lane might have been the same based on just sort of the layout of it, but I think Link Road, if you zooming in on that property, there's some oddly double-shaped lots and things like that that very well, if 9 could have easily been 13, but 9 was selected so they didn't go through Act 250.
And the other one was Black Rock across from Sadie Lane, right? Was that the name of that? It's also a 9
Yes,
unit.
I forget the exact name of it. The other one is also, there's one off Heinsberg Road also that was similar.
Yeah.
Also 9 units. So, you know, it's not surprising that a project would, given the choice of an entire additional review process and the expense associated with that versus 1 or 2 homes or 3 homes.
Right.
So the map on the right is again the eligible. Yep, go ahead.
I thought you already had suggested that the goal for our city center is not 1B but 1A. So
correct.
Okay.
So we can apply for both. 1B, under the state law, the Regional Planning Commission, when they submit their future land use map to the State Review Board, can also, at the exact same time, with permission of the municipality, seek 1B status. And everything in there is a self-certification. 1A is something that we will only be eligible for after it's adopted, and we will have to make our own independent application for it. So nothing in doing Tier 1A B either prevents us or commits us to, but it is the action we can do now to be at the front of the line.
The keyword is prevents us.
Right. So the Planning Commission's recommendation unanimously and staff's recommendation is that the City Council seek or request of the RPC that all eligible areas, including centers, planned growth areas, be submitted to the State Land Use Review Board for Tier 1B status. And there's a resolution to that effect in your memo. So at the end of this, that is the one formal action that we are recommending that you take this evening.
So another quick question about the 9 unit developments, right?
Yeah.
Can you theorize, like, if you took if you took the total cost to the developer of that 9 units, right, going through DRB and through Act 2, if they had to go through Act 250, right? Let's say it was 12 homes, right? Can you give a percentage discount that they would have gotten if they didn't have to go through Act 250? Is it like 10%?
I think that there's 2 components to it, Tim. There's the physical cost of all the engineering, and then there's the time associated and risk.
And time is money.
Right. So there's an application elsewhere in the city that you're all aware of that got its local approvals, and the Act 250 was appealed to the Environmental Court and the Supreme Court, and the local decision was never appealed.
Right.
So in that instance, there's the time associated with that and 3 years. Cost-wise, I couldn't give a number for exactly what an Act 250 is, but it's in the high tens of thousands typically for a medium-sized application. So you divide that into 9 homes, and that's the cost, but really it's the time.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also, I think, the cost for the permitting consultants or engineers to go through all that double paperwork.
Right.
So there's the fee, and then there's the consulting money on top of it.
Right. And, what we'll talk about, we can talk about a little bit in Tier 1A is leading up to this legislation, we did a fair amount of analysis of the extent to which our regulations in Act 250 overlap, and it is very substantial. So it's really ultimately process that these folks are developers are going through is additional process, not necessarily that much additional review or changes. We very rarely, if ever, typically folks do the local decision and then they do the Act 250. And in my 16 years here, there's probably been less than one or two handful finger counts of times when something has changed at the Act 250 level that required something to come back to the local level. It's almost zero.
Is there the possibility that some group could sue to prevent us from creating a tier 1B or a tier 1A area?
There's an appeal process of the
Charlie Baker again. At the Land Use Review Board, there is the opportunity for anyone, to object to the map while the Land Use Review Board is considering their approval.
Okay.
But that's it. There is no appeal of the Land Use Review Board's decision or the map after the Land Use Review Board approves it.
Okay. So in addition to saving the costs of having to go through Act 250, they also then reduce the risk of having somebody appeal, all the way, and so create all those litigation costs. Okay, got it.
Well, just to come back though, so are there, and maybe they're not, are there protections in Act 250, environmental protections that aren't in our LDRs that if we do this, maybe we want to think about incorporating, or?
So there are a couple of areas that are required. So for Tier 1B status, let me talk about that first. The interim standards that apply right now, this is essentially a continuation of. And so what somebody could get today, if you get Tier 1B status, would basically be a continuation of that. We have looked both at what are we required to do for Tier 1A, in terms of what standards are we missing from our local regulations. We've also done, when we did a comparison of local and Act 250 reviews, we have been doing some side-by-side of what's different. The main things that are different are our local regulations do not address rare, threatened, and endangered species, though notably it is federal law. Regardless of anything we do, the state has rules. The federal rules exist. It's really about administering them at a more local level. So that's one component that staff has been working with to identify that we would include and address in a way that makes sense. Historic resources is a second one that Act 250 covers, not a natural resource, but historic resources, and how we the standard in Act 250, the Tier 1A status is that that our local regulations are intended to be compatible with historic resources in our community. The other big one that you've had some conversations about in the community is blasting is dealt with at Act 250 today. As you know, you've given guidance to the Planning Commission to address that. So that is going to be on one of their next two agendas. Those are the primary areas. There are a few optional areas. An optional area for the community is Act 250 has agricultural mitigation rules that basically have, when there's agricultural impacted, money goes into a statewide pool, or you identify areas on site. Mm-hmm. Typically, they look for areas on site. I would argue that our local zoning, by having made the decisions of where we do and don't want to do it, is at a little bit of cross purposes with the ag mitigation, because we've essentially done our own locally by saying these areas where we do want to protect agriculture, to then say, and also we want to chunk out of the areas that we've selected for housing, creates a difficult mixing, but that's a conversation you can all have. I think that's about it in terms of the totality of what we found thus far.
So in terms of those items, like rare and endangered species, if we pass this resolution tonight, what's the timing? Will we be able to get those protections into the LDRs before this goes into effect, or
So the timing, as I understand it, Taylor, is that the Regional Planning Commission is looking to submit and seek approval in summer of 26.
Correct.
So a little over a year from now. If the council is interested in seeking Tier 1A status, we would be setting ourselves up to have the rules in place in advance of that timing, so we could be in immediately. Assuming that's where the council wants to go, therefore, those rare, threatened, endangered, those historic resources would have been in place before Tier 1B takes effect also.
Okay. And stuff like brownfields, I mean, that's state statute that has to be followed, I guess, probably. And
Nothing in, so all the rules that exist around the Department of Environmental Conservation, whether it's brownfields or wetlands or whatever it has be, though Act 250 has served as a clearinghouse of those, but the being in or not being in Act 250 does not mean that those rules do or don't apply. So brownfield rules apply regardless, wetland rules apply regardless at the state level. Okay. Want to talk about housing targets?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned this briefly at the beginning. The Act 47 and then Act 181 identified a need for housing targets to be established on a statewide basis. Those were produced in January of 2025 by the Vermont Housing Finance Agency on behalf of the state. There's a lot in there about the needs analysis. I'm just going straight to the numbers, but there's a lot more in there. It assigns a lower and an upper target for 2025 and 2050 at the regional level. Act 47 says that it's the responsibility of the regional planning commissions to work with the communities and to allocate those at a municipal level. And then Act 181 then says that the next iteration of our own municipal plan must incorporate those targets. So it's really sort of bringing state all the way down to local and aligning them. I've worked very closely with Taylor, Charlie, and many of our other counterparts all around the region to look at these numbers and develop a methodology. I think the starting point, Taylor, the low is below or at what has already been taking place in Chittenden County. The high or upper really represents the solving of all issues, neither of which are really realistic outcomes for the next 25 years in terms of if we're trying to make change, but we're not assuming that we can solve all things. So as a starting point, the Chittenden County RPC worked with us of identifying what's the halfway point between those two, and that's really the number we've been focusing on. The region was, after several iterations and some tremendous work from RPC staff and pulling and pushing a lot of different ways of looking at this, the proposed approach is to divide the Chittenden County into three broad categories. The four cities, South Burlington, Essex Junction, and Winooski, that are home to currently about 50% of all the homes in Chittenden County. The rural towns that are really have little to no infrastructure. They might have a hamlet, but they really don't have any infrastructure. And then the suburban or mixed urban rural communities that have components of villages like Richmond or Shelburne, but also have really substantial, overwhelming majority portions of the communities being rural. And I think your point, Charlie, about transit corridors may sort of bridge that gap between the parts of some of those communities like Williston and Shelburne that feel a little more urban. And so that might be a way to add a little bit of nuance to this. But fundamentally, the starting point for this was to look at the regional target and say the goal is not necessarily to see a lot more housing in our most rural areas. And so the target for that area was tamped down as compared to historic growth rates. And then there was a lot of discussion about what should the target be in the four most urban or the four cities. And there was discussion of retaining it at 50%, and then ultimately the unanimous recommendation of the myself and our counterparts called the Planning Advisory Committee was to make that 60%, because this is the way in which we can begin to really tackle the resiliency question of how do we have transit be affordable? How do we make sure that the services that exist that are statewide or services are in areas that are accessible to people? And maybe most importantly, at least from my perspective, how do we send very clear messages to the legislature about where investment is needed in the future in terms of whether it's education or water and sewer or parks or name the subject area. So that's what presents itself in this target here. I did want to note that after this was published here, we found that the data was a little bit off for South Burlington in terms of our historic growth rate. It says 142 units a year. We've actually been averaging since the year 2000, 175 units a year. So just one little clarification.
Okay. Why is the Burlington? Why are the Burlington numbers lower than?
Can I was going to clarify.
Sure. Well, I mean, the short answer is they're physically a lot smaller than we are, including. Even if we separate all of our natural resource protection areas and all of our habitat blocks, their land area is much smaller than ours. And then we also think about the fact that they already have twice as many homes. Yeah. And so the opportunities for infill, they don't have the U-Mall, which is a 60-acre, almost entirely paved property with no housing on it that could be hundreds and hundreds and thousands of homes.
Let me ask you. Along the same line that Tim is, something that jumped out at me a little bit differently is, I had assumed through their own definitions here, cities, this is cities and all makes sense. And I get Burlington is already there, let's say, and now it's the others catching up with Burlington that in the cities category. But when I, made the list of the top 4 in the middle category, number 4 was Essex. And Essex broke off from Essex Junction for a lot of different reasons, but one of it was not the density. I know it's not South Burlington, but I was just surprised to see Essex as the number 4 ambition on the list. And is that a broader definition of, let's call it urban?
Charlie Baker again. They still have sewer service area going north of the junction and Essex Town Center. So they do have a vision of having quite a bit of suburban urban growth in that part of town. But they are very much, as Paul was describing it, substantially rural, but still with an urban portion that they have. And you can see, their population is not that different than the junction, but it's spread out a little bit more. But they do have a concentration, so it's a mix.
One of the things that's really interesting, and especially when you add the transit component to it, that makes Chittenden County a little bit different from the rest of the state is that the core communities, the most populous communities, are all in a geographic web to one another. And so when we think about the opportunities that present themselves to have more functional transit, and also the reality of how people use our communities every day, people use these 4 and Essex Town essentially interchangeably every day. In other counties, the population centers may actually be pretty spread. So, Rutland County has Rutland City, and then the next, most populous area is Poultney, which is a 45-minute drive away. So it's a very different setup, and for us, there's this opportunity of building the web.
I go back to what Jesse says. The challenge is we're all different communities, even though as you talk about it, we're just like one area. But yeah.
This slide is just a little graph showing just how the communities are why they fell into their different categories, essentially. So South Burlington, top left, is very similar in our future land use makeup to Winooski, Burlington, and Essex Junction. You see the mixed urban and rural communities have a very substantially different pattern to them. So even Essex Town, beyond that area, the bulk of it is outside of sewer service areas, pretty dramatically. a couple of other just sort of breakdowns of how this all looks. On the left is a little breakdown of existing and future density if the targets were fully met. So, and this is only in the centers, the transition areas, and the planned growth areas. So South Burlington would, under this, even if the full target were met, would be a less dense housing units per acre in those growth areas than the existing Burlington, than the existing Winooski, and about where Heinsberg's village is. So just in terms of, what does this look like? Obviously the shape of that may be, as we form it, but, and then just what the, ultimately the, what on a countywide level, what would the result of meeting these 60% target to the 4 cities, 5%, 3.5% to the rurals, and the balance to the mixed urban and rurals? What would that look like in 2050? That's the green bar. It's not completely upending what exists, because this is only 25 years worth of, most of our communities are 250 years old. So this is 25 years worth of change on that scale. And then just lastly for you all, how does this compare to South Burlington? So the last few years we've seen substantially higher growth than what this average would be, largely in our city center area. You can see that it's been somewhat cyclical in terms of a rate of change. 3 of the last 5 decades we've had a higher growth rate than what this would be over the 25-year period, which is 2.3%. But rate of growth obviously changes as numbers change. So in absolute, we show it both ways. And then lastly, last slide, Steve, is just summing up what we just said. That 60% core target really represents an opportunity to focus investment from our perspective. The target rate is 2.3%. That is a little bit over what our city plan calls for, which is anticipates, which is 1.5 to 2%, but that all predates the housing needs assessment, the legislation, all of that work. And then the timing of this, as you think about what you want to do with this, really is kind of ideal, because you have just started your conversation about what does it mean to have a growth management plan. You're doing an economic development strategic plan, parks and open space master plans. So all of this is really the perfect timing to be having this conversation. That's it.
So the targets, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it build something, So I understand it's good to be aspirational and to have goals, right? But how realistic are these in terms of the amount of capital that it would be needed to deploy to build this and get people in there? And then what percentage could possibly be affordable? Because nobody knows how to build affordable housing without public, private, or nonprofit participation, right? And then you've got the tripwires for, school capacity and the tripwire for fresh water and for sewer, right? I'm just thinking out longer term. So
I think I'm going to go back exactly to where I started. I think that is what this opportunity is for us right now. I think, and Charlie can talk more about this at the the legislature level, but I think the state legislators were thinking, we know we need to change regulation. We know we need to change incentive programs. We know we need to change ed funding. We know we need to change ed capital investments, but we don't know where to make that investment if we don't know where the population's going to go and how that's going to be spread out across the state. So before doing that, setting these intentional housing targets statewide to say, okay, now communities, what do you need to do all of those things over a 20-year period? And that's where our to me, that's where we have the opportunity to exercise a tremendous amount of leadership in helping to define what some of those things are.
So that's the state trying to implement a growth management plan for us in some ways,
No,
right?
I think it's the state saying this is the population we need to be a more healthy economy and a more healthy service sector, a more healthy hospital network, and more healthy all these things. Let's figure out strategically where we want to go and then work in partnership with communities to figure out actually how to do it.
Can I add one more piece that I didn't mention before, that I think is really important for our local conversation on this, which is, Tim, there's absolutely gaps in various components of it. One area that we are well positioned for is our existing zoning, inclusive of the work that is taking place right now in the update to the form-based code. There are innumerable opportunities to streamline the process, but in terms of the capacity that our zoning allows for, we believe we can accommodate this housing target. It is not, nothing in here is saying that we need to revisit, unless you choose to, anything in the subjects of habitat blocks or taking our low-scale neighborhoods and saying they've got to be 5-story buildings, none of that. So the work that you've already done to say Shelburne Road can accommodate more housing, that there's small-scale infill that's appropriate in neighborhoods, that city center, that has already accommodated these needs from a zoning perspective. Obviously, there's infrastructure, there's investments and things like that, but I just wanted to make clear that from a policy perspective, nothing in here is telling you to upend the apple cart.
Yeah. So I think the Act 250 recommendations are good, and on board with that as long as we incorporate the LDR protections that today only exist in Act 250. And I know that you've done a lot of hard work on these targets, Paul, the Planning Commission, staff, but right now I'm personally having a hard time with it. As Mike said, we're all different communities. And we've been talking about our own growth management plan for South Burlington to understand the impact of growth on our city and our residents, and what it means for us for congestion and our schools and noise and water quality and other quality of life dimensions. And it feels to me like adopting these targets now kind of short circuits that, right? It short circuits us doing the work of where do we want to be in 20 years and what do those scenarios look like. So I recommended at our last working group that we do 3 studies. One, a low growth, and I don't know exactly what that means, but in my mind it was like 1.5%. Another mid, which matches our historic growth patterns that are in our city plan, 1.5 to 2, and another high, 2, 2.5, 3. I'm not exactly sure. And when we do those studies and we see the impact of on our city, then we could adopt targets. But I don't know how we kind of adopt these targets, and the mid target is higher than like double our historic growth without doing that work. It just feels to me like we're short-circuiting it and not understanding exactly what it means for our city and our residents.
I guess this is the time I step in for the legislature. I am not a legislator, but I was there for some of these conversations. A couple things I want to note. One is you're not alone. I think almost every town we're talking to has the same angst. And it's a lot to look at 25 years worth of growth and try to translate that, right? Like it feels like it's all landing at once, which is not the case, right? This is 25 years worth of growth of a goal, right? It's and the legislature, I think, really wanted to set out a goal for communities, I mean, for regions, for the state, and for municipalities, just to work towards. So I think more than anything, this is directionality. I don't know for sure if the legislature is going to care if you're 1.3% or 1.8% or 2.3% annual growth rate over the years. I'm not sure, and this is what I'm saying very sincerely. I don't know. Maybe at some point the state feels more strongly about it. At this point, these are just goals, I also, so I've been doing this stuff for a long time. As you can tell, I used to have more hair. It used to be darker, but and we're right now in a trough in the real estate market, right? High interest rates, high cost of materials, high cost of labor. It's hard to imagine more significant growth happening. But I think part of what the legislature was doing, in my mind, was saying we need to address our housing issue and become open for growth. We have not been open for growth, I'm going to say generally as a state, for the last number of decades. So So anyway, that's just, maybe that's a little bit higher level conversation here, but, and then more specifically though on process, you are not being asked to adopt these targets. We are, as the RPC, taking input on these, and we're trying to balance all of our municipalities and what happens within them. So happy to take whatever feedback you might have for us.
So just to understand that last process point. So,
Yeah.
right, because I guess it said on this that comment and review is due by May 19th. So
Exactly.
consider my comment.
Yeah.
And then let's, once these targets are adopted, what does that mean for us? We have to, we presumably have to, then we're required to incorporate it in our city plan, and that must have some impact. It must have some meaning. Like what is the meaning?
There is not any specific accountability mechanisms at this point in time. I think, as we've been
one could be envisioned. One could be envisioned.
Yeah, that'll be subject of future legislative conversation if they ever get there, and that also presumes that the dynamic within the legislature is unhappy with what's happening across our state. So there's a lot of ifs stacking up here, right? Right at this point in time, all we can deal with what is. There is no consequences to either meeting or not meeting. I mean, right? It'd be ideal, like if a town said, "Hey, we're meeting the targets. You get 2x infrastructure investment from the state or something." There could be some mechanisms that they think about in terms of trying to support towns that are embracing it. I think in talking to individual legislators, I've had this kind of conversation before. They know there's going to be some towns that don't embrace growth. And there's going to be some towns that do. And like the ones that do are going to be great. We're going to support them. The ones that don't are going to get left behind in some ways, whether that's state investment or what happens with their schools or who knows what. So there are no consequences now. This is really, I think the legislature wanted to put something out there to have an aspirational goal. I think you used the word aspiration. I've been using that term also. These are kind of goals to just help move in a direction. No real consequences. Now I think your point about like being incorporated into the city's plan is a good one. I think at some point we're going to be asked to approve your city plan. And this might be one of the factors in there. Like, are they making some progress towards the housing goals? But again, there's gray area there. No hard and fast rules.
Interestingly, for our community, our plan is not up until 2032 either. So there's not to say that is a reason to kick a can down the road, but there will be a lot of churn and learning over the next few years as to what this represents at the state level before we happen to come up ourselves.
And from my perspective, everything that the city of South Burlington does, I mean, you've been the biggest housing, factory in the state for quite some time, right? Like you've been producing and doing smart growth and trying to do the right thing. So I just want to applaud you and encourage you. Don't stop now.
So I mean, the legislature just dipping their toe in because it's only a 2-year, Act 250 exemption at this point.
The interim exemption.
It's just 2 years. It terminates in 2027, right?
That's the interim exemption.
So
that is in place without you doing anything.
So the connecting piece is the legislature invited communities to then seek Tier 1B status to then essentially make the interim permanent.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Didn't get that.
But if I can also just my comment about for different communities is actually that I think this is smart. None of our communities, as was found by the fire, can operate in our own, nor can our businesses operate in our own. People have to live, etc. And I think every community can have a vision of the sort of milieu they want to create, but they also have to be conscious of how to maintain it, to continue it. And so I for one welcome it. I understand that you have to have goals to have the plan to address what becomes possible, not possible. How does the market shift? Are we in a recession the next 5 years? All these things will play into it. But I think unless we have strategic planning and the acknowledgement that we have to basically help each other and therefore share some of the benefits, but also some of maybe the burdens, to have those benefits, to me, makes a lot of sense.
So you need a motion to ask the Planning Commission to request I'm just not asking this first. To
So
ask
on
for-
the resolution,
Let him finish his thought.
Sorry.
I think he's going in a different direction.
right, to request Tier 1B status, right? That's the action tonight?
No, not
Yes.
to ask the planning, ask that planning commission.
yes,
The
Not our
CCRPC,
planning
I'm sorry.
that planning commission.
That-
Oh, it's Chittenden County, sorry.
Yeah,
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Did you have a second comment?
I had some other questions and comments.
Yeah.
Yeah. Changing just a little bit, jumping back to slide 17 for a second. South Burlington, even with the growth projected, shows us at averaging below 3 dwelling units per acre in the city, which from a transportation standpoint is below what supports public transportation. And it makes sense for this presentation to show that, but I think that it would be really helpful for me and for us to look at our dwelling units per acre in the city center area and in the other areas within our city so that we can see where we are actually creating density that supports transportation corridors. And
to your point from earlier, Lori, this does not reflect the nuance of our own community.
I understand
where
that.
we have layers like that, and we can absolutely build those on top.
I'm saying this makes total sense for what this presentation is. I'm just projecting it would be really useful to see the dwelling units per acre projections for the different parts of our city so that we can see how that relates to our transportation network. The other piece that I'll throw out that doesn't so much change my thoughts about what we have here, but a lot of this work, and I think it's great work, is predicated on looking at what's happened in the past to predict where we're going to be in the future, which is predicting that we're on sort of a path which all of the indicators that we are getting from environmental, from political, from et cetera, lead me to strongly believe that what's happened in the past is not an accurate predictor of where we're going to be in the future. So while I look at this and it all makes sense from the stew pot that it was created out of, I have reticence about where we're actually headed, and I think we're going to need to make big adjustments as we move forward. So, and we talk about housing, but material costs, labor, et cetera, all prevent us from having, quote, affordable housing. The types of housing that we're building prevent us from having affordable housing.
That's not mentioned in here at all.
No, it's not meant, but
Right.
so where this all makes sense, there's a lot of work that has to happen, which we're doing on our local level. Looking at the map and seeing this development spread out all over South Burlington, it looks kind of scary. But if we look at our corridors and what we're trying to develop, that growth could happen without making huge changes in the way our community feels. I just wanted to sort of throw that out and say, this is an outline, but we got a lot of underlying work to do with it.
So, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, it's a really kind of fascinating metaphysical point, Lori. And I think it's really interesting because I have been focusing a lot on we need to tell the story of where we've been before we tell the story of where we're going. Yeah. But you're right that the path may not be there. But I still think we need to understand where we've been so we know when we get way off the path.
I totally agree.
Then we can make different policy decisions because the path has left us.
Yes.
So interesting.
Past performance is no predictor of future performance.
Well, I mean,
particularly
keep
today.
that in mind.
A really good example is that some of our areas, like the Shelburne Road corridor, 20 years ago, we didn't allow housing to exist there at all.
Right.
It was not
Right.
permissible.
Yeah, there was
we
no Bartlett
started
Brook
to see that
apartment.
transition. Nothing said that it had to be the area of car dealerships starting in the 1950s. And if we think about what the trajectory of that area has been in the 20 years since we've allowed housing, where we started to see it, and where do we see ourselves as that accelerates and more people want to be near more people, that area could have the same amount of paved surface but be completely different.
Yeah.
And how do we do all of this that we're looking to do going forward in a way that doesn't end up looking like the extension of the Miracle Mile across America and retaining who we really are? That's the work you've been doing, so I appreciate it.
Is there a motion?
With that in mind, perhaps I move
Is there a
that
motion?
we accept.
Is there a motion?
Yes, a
Okay,
motion
can
to
we-
accept.
do you have the motion to read?
No, I don't have it on the.
It's on,
I don't control the.
It's on your.
Are we ready to go ahead and
agenda.
read the motion? Because it is 5 after 10.
Yes.
So I believe
Can you flash the motion up? I'll have, or you'll read it.
You can't approve. So the motion would be approve the resolution requesting Act 250 Tier 1B status for eligible areas of the city.
I so move.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Mr. Chalnick? You turn on your microphone. I'm just asking.
I'm ready for the vote.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Very
Thank you for your
cool
time,
presentation. It's kind of exciting for what it might produce. We will see. Finally, the state said, let's remove a little bit of Act 250 oversight, because we've seen how it has like stopped projects dead in their tracks for years, right? Not that that's a bad thing all the time, but in these areas where it's a growth center, just take a chance. So,
Well, as long as we have incorporated what's not here now.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to item 10, which is discuss and possibly approve the 2025 policy. Discuss and possibly approve the 2025 policy and statutory committee recruitment process.
All right. So gave you a cover sheet and a memo. You have 34 seats up for reappointment this year. With that, I forget the number, but it's a lot of meetings to interview people. So my recommendation is you approve the process as we've outlined. That would have us announcing the appointments tomorrow or the next day with a deadline of May 28th. And you have meetings basically every night the week of June 9th in buckets to interview folks and appoint on the 16th.
I have a suggestion for potentially making this more efficient.
That would be fantastic.
So it may not be, but it may be, for instance, that for Bike Ped Committee, the only folks who apply are 3 existing members that we know, who we've interviewed before, who we have their resume. It may be the same thing for some of the others. Could we start the process with an executive session where we review the folks who have applied, we review what information they've supplied us, and see if there's opportunities to say, we don't actually need to interview this slate. We don't actually need to interview that slate, because maybe there's 3 slots, only 2 have applied, and they look like it may well be we can decide as a council that there are some interviews we don't need to do. And after the executive session, we'll then have, a bunch that we say, okay, these are the ones that we do need to do.
Let me just.
Does that mean that, so for example, if there were 2 openings and 3 applications, of which 2 were incumbents?
No, then I would probably do it. It'd be only fair to give the one.
Absolutely.
Well, you may not have to do 2 incumbents.
That's
though.
what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, you may not have to. But I was actually thinking an easier case where
If
there's
it's
2
3-3,
slots, there's 2 incumbents,
Yeah.
and then the incumbents. Well, what do we need to do the interview for,
Yeah,
right?
No, I understand.
But I agree with your case too.
No, I was that was going to be my clarification question. If you're talking in situations where there are 2 incumbents and only 2 slots and no one else is competing, it makes sense. But I think if there's anyone else competing, I think all 3 people need to perform, because it's a public thing. And why have you chosen in the public?
I'm okay with that. I didn't actually mean to go as far as Tim went. I meant the former case.
I fully agree. Makes sense.
But on the other hand, if you want to be really efficient about it, if you are familiar with people and they are incumbents, right, and and we are in executive session, we can discuss, the particulars. And if we don't feel we need to interview them, we don't have to.
We could always choose to do that, but I do think there is something to the public seeing them again. But I mean, look, we can discuss that in executive session and make a determination.
Is that possible?
So that's yes, I think that's technically possible. I think we would need to look at calendars a little bit in this conversation. I guess I would just I love the idea of efficiencies, and I'm all for if we have 2 people applying for 2 seats and they've been serving fine. I think from an equity perspective and trying to get new voices at the table, it doesn't necessarily support that unless you're really kind of interviewing all who apply kind of thing.
No, but
I know what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
If it's just the 2 for 2, fine.
Yeah.
I'll be curious if that happens.
I do think in that case, I agree, Andrew, with the opportunity to be efficient. I think the outreach for soliciting people who may have an interest needs to be really solid then, so that we have a pretty robust, or as robust a group as we're going to get before we go through that culling process.
So what Andrew was saying would possibly predicate that after May 28th, when all the applications are in, we have a brief meeting, executive session, to look at the slate and determine what has to be interviewed and what doesn't.
Yeah, reconcile.
Yeah.
So how about friendly amendment to this concept? So you have a regular meeting on June 2nd. At that meeting, you could have said executive session, which would be right after the deadline. I think we would still, in order to make appointments on the 16th, I think we would still tell candidates that we were holding interviews the week of the 9th, so they could sort of hold some time just in case, because it's going to be quite an administrative exercise to then go back in and try and slot people in.
Yep.
Okay. So can we, in the memo I sent you, there is
June 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th.
with specific hours.
Yeah.
Does that work for you all?
I know I am not available the last 2 days that were on that
11th
list.
and 12th?
Yeah.
Okay, so June 9th from 4 to 8. June 10th from 4 to 8. June 11th from 3 to 5, which is right before the CCRPC event that night.
Yep.
And June 12th from 3 to 5 if needed.
June 10th was 4 to 8 p.m.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to have a hard time with that one. I could do 4 to 6, but, or I know June 10th
Hold on,
I'm
I
not
can't.
available.
Hold on.
Do we have a VLCT training at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, the 11th of something or other?
That's the CCRPC hosting all of the elected officials here at the city center from around Jennings County.
I've got that at 5:30, but I've got something else at 5, unless it's...
I've got that in at 5.
Maybe it's the same thing.
I think it's the same thing.
Okay.
I think there's something 5:30.
Okay, so
June 11th.
June 9th from 4 to 8.
Yes.
Anyone knows?
For all these meetings,
No.
I'm gonna have to come back as a maybe. I have to check it home. That's
Okay.
That time is the dinner time. I'm missing 2 responsibilities I have 4 days in a row. That's a big ask.
Okay, other than
come on,
Mike,
where are your
anyone
priorities?
knows?
Family, back in the book.
Repeat.
Oh God, I can't do any of the meetings. No, I'm sorry. I'm
You're on the Allegheny.
I'm not here.
You're where? Where are you?
I'm in Bonaire.
You can't dial in?
No.
Yeah.
Why at least is my
Come on, where are
wife.
priorities, Andrew?
I mean, like,
It's gonna be
maybe
hot.
like an hour or 2.
It's going to be hot.
No, I can't dial in 4 evenings. My whole family's with me in Bonaire.
Okay, so now we're into
Sorry.
so you're now into making appointments in July, which I think is what it is at this point. So looking at the week of June 16th or the week of June 23rd, is anyone out of town for either of those two?
June 23rd, I'll be abroad for work for the whole. Let me find out exactly when I'm leaving. I'm leaving from like the 7th Probably the 17th and would not be back till maybe midnight on the 25th.
The week,
And I'll be in Europe, 7 hours difference. It's going to meetings all day and then a fence at night. I just will not be.
What about the week of the Tuesday the 17th?
I can't do that.
Wednesday the 18th.
the week of the 17th is good for me, except Wednesday, the 18th.
June 17th to 25. I'm out.
Oh, you're out 17th.
June 17th to 25.
You're out.
I'm not sure we're going to find
Yeah, we're not gonna.
a time that's going to work for everybody.
Can we just find even one day? I mean, can we do this, as you say, between a little luck on efficiency scenario and knock off one day of 3 or 4? Can we at least move the process forward if we can just find?
Maybe the week of June 2nd?
Yeah.
Like either the 4th or the 5th?
So the 4th, you have a steering
The 5th?
committee meeting.
The 5th?
The 5th we could do.
Or the 3rd?
The 3rd, I can't. It's the Civic Soul is in town for our strategic planning site visit that week. 5th or the 6th, I could do.
We have a city council at 6:30 on the 2nd. Can we do an hour early and even just one set of interviews?
5th and 6th are both wide open for me.
6 are good for me.
Can we also just tack on
And
an extra hour on the 2nd?
the 2nd,
I've already gotten
Well,
permission
we can't-
out, so it's easier for me to send it out.
You
we can't do interviews before we have our executive session.
Oh, I see.
So 5th and 6th work?
Works for me.
So why don't we grab those 2 dates and see what happens?
Okay, so we're going to do like 3 to 7 or 3 to 8 on the 5th and 3 to 6 on the 6th. Okay.
I'll get back to you. Try to sell that.
Unless we're really
3 to what? 3 to
3 to
6?
8 and then 3 to 6. I'll have Andrea send calendar invites tomorrow.
Can we limit people to 5 minutes?
You
We
you
could-
all
yes.
have 100% control over that.
Yes.
And from an
To
equity
limit them to
perspective,
3
I
minutes.
highly suggest you do that.
Limit it to 5 minutes. I mean,
5 minutes, whatever it is. We
right?
can, yeah.
So it's not.
No,
10,
I
15
know.
minutes.
Sometimes
That means limiting
You
the questions that we ask,
I will-
and I think that's important.
I will have a big stick.
Or we'll have a big stick, Tim.
I'm not the one. Okay, sometimes I do drag it on. Okay, true. So
We'll all have big sticks.
Okay, so we're going the 2nd executive session, June 5th and 6th, and maybe worst case scenario, we do a few on the 16th at a regular meeting to
Yes.
make it work.
Okay. So I think it's important to do this as soon as possible.
So the second one is 3 to 8 as well?
3 to 7?
3 to 7?
3 to 6.
Okay,
I would
that's fine. They're just
Friday
blocking
night,
it off. We're
folks,
just
Friday
blocking
night.
it off.
Yes.
okay.
All right.
I got it.
Sorry about that.
So you're Andrew, just for my records, you're gone the whole week of the 16th or the 9th?
Yes, I leave on that Saturday. I return the next Saturday.
Thank you.
What is Wednesday, June 4th, Skyline BTV? Is that an airport thing?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Policies and strategies. Speaking of challenging planning things.
Oh, so we're done with 10? We're good? Item 10, you can move
I'm
on.
good.
Okay, so item 11, but just,
Oh, sorry. One more thing on 10.
Yes.
Sorry.
yes.
In prior years, you have asked me to reach out to the chairs to get feedback on what the committees need. Do you still want me to do that, or do you all want to do that as council
I
liaisons?
think if you do it and then share with us, I think that's the most efficient. If we're talking about efficiencies, and then we all get the same information.
Yep.
I mean, that's just my thoughts.
The only thing I would add to that is when the candidates come in and we see what they are, I've talked to my chairs of the committees that I'm in to get feedback from them about the specific candidates and so that they're part of that process.
So we don't do that as staff. We keep the names
Mm-hmm.
quiet until they're appointed, but you all can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But you will hear from the chairs that we don't share that
Okay.
information in
Right.
advance. You guys can do whatever you like.
I just certainly the last time around, but it's been really helpful to get the feedback from the chairs about so that they have some input into who's going to end up in their room.
Okay, done with 10?
Yep.
Now, number 11, which is discuss and possibly approve FY26 policy, priorities, and strategies process.
So I guess, again, memo, cover sheet, draft strategies in your packet. I hope you've looked at them. I think one of the things I want to call out in this is that I know that this is really a challenging process for you all because it creates this kind of fallacy of ability to change things or add things or subtract things because we are very much on a multi-year moving train here. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and also acknowledge that this is an iterative process. We can change it, that we can make it as helpful to us all as possible. Anna and I have spent some time thinking about how we change it this year to better align with our city plan and city plan reporting. So that's what you saw in the spreadsheet as our attempt to start doing that. Our proposal on a timeline is in May, we asked committees to put together their proposed work plans. In May and June, the leadership team builds our set of recommendations for you all. If you want to submit ideas, you can. We hold the retreat, ideally the end of June, and go from there. But I'm open to any feedback. I also have a key question at the end about public process in this, and if we want to do that a little different this year.
I have a quick question about the draft that you sent out.
Yep.
And how things are included or not included. I noticed the Dorset Street shared use path I did not see on here. Did I just miss it, or what CIP projects end up on here or not on here?
Yeah, that's a great question, Laurie. So so this is not a inventory of what we do. You know, there's nowhere on here does it say we respond to calls for service. Nowhere on here does it say we check out library books. We have a whole CIP of, that, if you guys remember from Tom's budget presentation, the, 67 projects they're working on. Those are still priorities that you've adopted through adopting the budget and the CIP, but don't show up on here. My kind of rule of thumb of if something shows up on here is it really a strategic thing we could turn on or off to accomplish the city plan? So for example, the Dorset shared use path absolutely could be on this list. I think it hasn't been included in the past because it's such a connector piece. We knew we were going to do it. It would be really, really hard not to do it. And this is where this kind of fallacy of controls starts popping up of, at this point, could we not do Garden Street? Probably not, but it's such a big effort we included in here.
Okay, I just was trying to understand why Garden Street or the Market Street to Tilio Drive intersection are on here.
Yeah.
Just understanding
yeah.
where that bar is. And it sounds like it's loose.
It's loose. Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't do a crosswalk to what we discussed last year, but we had some things like on a bike rack of some sort. So are you proposing we still have a meeting where we discuss this again?
Yeah, so sorry, I created confusion with providing you this. This was just, because we'd done the work, I gave it to you. This was Anna and I playing with the spreadsheet to try and see what it would look like if we presented it a different way than we've presented it in the past. This is just a draft. This is not our set of recommendations. This is more, think about this more as from a structure standpoint than a content standpoint.
Because that was going to be my question. So, right, the process structure is fine, but this is not intended to be complete.
No.
There's stuff missing.
Not.
Fine.
No,
Because I also noticed
that's
a bunch of stuff missing.
No, yes.
Okay.
So I like this format. The minute I saw it, I thought it was very clear. My only question is, and you have a column called prior fiscal year status, right? But do you want a column that has red, yellow, or green headlight that says it's right on schedule, or it's yellow because of something, or it's red because you've run into a real obstacle? I'm just asking politely if anybody has an interest in that, or whether
I agree with you on getting a sense of where things are in the timing stuff. I agree, because then it makes makes sense. It gives you a sense of what to expect, and if people talk to you, you know how to respond to them.
Because you have a goal. Well, we've got a goals actions, but do you have a goal for completion? Like is there a completion goal time? Not really. Maybe you could just be, like red, yellow, green for target.
So can I interrupt you?
No, go ahead.
So
Go ahead,
I think that's why we tried to. So this column that's called fiscal year goal, that's where we tried to capture what are we actually going to achieve in this year, as opposed. So if you go down to the ordinances are a little different, but if you go down to capital projects, so Garden Street, for example, second one from the top, or City Green, first one. We're not going to necessarily build a City Green in FY26, but at a minimum, we're going to set a goal of coming to agreement with our partners. Yeah. So we've tried to say what's the bite-sized piece of this year, and Anna in the background has a whole separate part of doing it differently. Like this year is to do a much more robust data visualization for you all. So for all capital projects, you see the different phases of capital projects and where we are in each project. So you can see what's in right of way, what's in final design, what's in construction, blah, blah. So I think not necessarily in this grid, but over the course of the year, our goal is to really get much more to that kind of data visualization product.
Progress.
And I'm assuming that from our retreat on Wednesday and conversation, there will be other things that come from that may end up on this.
Absolutely. This is not even the leadership set of recommendations or what you would all add to it. This was much more provided to you from a structure.
Just a structural standpoint.
Nor is it the limits the capability of this great staff of the South Burlington. They can do much more than that. They can probably do twice of it.
Oh, Michael.
Yeah, and Jesse, I on the type of effort, I'm not sure if I fully get that yet, but if we're going to have some kind of working session on this, to me, that's an opportunity to talk about that further.
Sure.
Do you need a motion to approve this?
Well, what I would really like, if you are comfortable with kind of proceeding this way, is a date for the retreat. That kind of end goal will back us into all the other work.
Okay.
So break back out your calendars.
Okay.
Late
about
June, early
Wednesday
July.
this week?
Wednesday this week.
June.
Oh, that's such jocular.
June 25th looks good for us. Or June 27th looks very good for us.
I will both be.
You won't be around.
I'm gone, remember, from the 17th to the 25th of June.
That's perfect.
So yeah, go ahead and knock yourselves out. Enjoy. Fully confident and trusted.
July 1?
We will have staff out, including both Anna and Steve. But if that is what it is,
July 2.
That's July 4th week.
You're at that whole week, yeah.
A day off?
Let's go back to the previous week.
June 3rd. No, that same way.
June 27th would be best for staff.
I will be here both.
You here 26 and 27?
I'll get back midnight.
27th? Give you a day?
Friday the 27th?
Yeah, it's
7
Friday.
works.
Excellent. Good job, team.
9?
Yeah, we'll do like 9 to 1 or 9 to 2.
I have a crown. From 12 to 1.
You're getting crowned? Overseas?
Monarchy is the biggest state. Where have you been?
From 12 to 1?
12 to 1, I have in Essex Junction.
All right, we're going to maximize you from 9 to noon.
9 to noon.
About 8:30 to noon. Can you do that?
I'll just cut out.
Sure.
That's okay with me. 8:30 to
8:30
noon.
8:30 to noon? Okay. 8:30. Retreat. City Council.
Well done. And then the final question on this is, so in past years some folks, it's hard to think about robust public comment at 8:30 on a Friday morning. Do we want to put on, for example, an agenda item on the 16th on the regular agenda to say, in anticipation of the council's retreat, ask for public comment on priorities for next year?
Sure.
Sure, but can you stop people from coming to
No, we
public
can't stop
comment at a
people.
meeting, at a war meeting?
No, we can't. We definitely cannot stop people from that. But
But it's a
This is
suggestion.
to create, this is to create more opportunity for feedback.
Yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Okay, thank you very much. It would be great if you approved as we've discussed, but you don't have to.
I move to approve as discussed.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. It's unanimous. Going to item 12, convene as Liquor Control Commission to consider the following applications for approval. A bunch of them. Can I have a motion to enter as liquor control?
So moved.
For a second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 We are now in liquor control, so can I have a motion to approve all of the license applications as shown on the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. It's unanimous. So can I have a motion to come out of liquor control?
So moved.
Second.
We have motion and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So we're out of liquor control. We're at item 13, which is review the significant agenda topics below for our next meeting on May 19th.
So what I'm currently tracking is, as Elizabeth said at the beginning, a report from the Charter Committee, the Social Service Fund allocation discussion. CSWD will be here doing their budget presentation. I believe Patina is going to be ready for a conversation on the underground utilities. And I believe Steve will have a resolution on the capital assessment fee for the fire department.
And I won't be here.
No, Andrew. That's all I got.
Okay. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Is there any other business tonight? Okay, not hearing there's any other business. We will then consider entering into an executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313A3 for the purpose of evaluating a public employee and specifically the city manager. But that doesn't make sense, the city manager part. Does?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have a motion?
I move that the council enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing the evaluation of the city employee, specifically the city manager, inviting city manager Jesse Baker and Steve Block into session with the council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we will not be coming back, and we're just going to stay here, right?
Yep.
And we're going to terminate the meeting.